Section 47 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Catrina. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The Application of the Art of Reasoning to History, Part 1. Some years ago I commenced a work on the philosophy of history. It was proposed to be written in the form of lectures. After reading 2 lectures, I was compelled, from want of leisure, to lay the subject aside, and it will probably never be resumed. The commencement of the work may now for the first time be useful by standing at the head of this section. Philosophy has been defined the knowledge of the reasons of things, in opposition to history, which is the bare knowledge of facts, or to mathematics, which is the knowledge of the quantity of things, or their measures. It is the province of philosophy to gather together those facts which have occurred, to investigate their causes and operations, and to classify them according to the principles they may have developed. It is thus that the chemist takes every object in nature, examines its constituent principles, notices their operation when brought into combination with other bodies, and from the effects he observes he forms those general rules, which are universally true, and which, when arranged and demonstrated, form what may be called the philosophy of the science. Thus it is in every branch of experimental philosophy. At first the substances of water or air, or other natural objects, are merely observed. By and by a few experiments are made upon them. Other experiments follow, and either correct or confirm those which preceded. Experiments are multiplied until it is found at last that in a variety of instances the same experiments are uniformly followed by the same results. These are then considered as established truths. The knowledge thus acquired is acted upon in the investigation of other bodies. Fresh truths are elicited, and the whole body of truths or general principles thus established by repeated experiments constitute what is termed natural and experimental philosophy. But this course of procedure is not confined to material substances. The moralist observes minutely what actions conduce to happiness and what lead to misery. Those actions which lead to happiness he calls good or virtuous. Those actions which lead to misery he calls bad or vicious. He examines the causes or motives from whence those actions proceed, and he considers the motives to be good or evil according to the good or bad actions they produce. Hence he forms general rules by which he declares that certain classes of actions or motives are good, and ought to be inculcated, while other classes of actions or motives are evil, and ought to be condemned. He compares these rules with the relations which man sustains in reference to other beings in the universe. Hence, to examine the reasonableness and propriety of moral conduct, and to investigate and lay down rules for moral action, constitute what is termed the science of moral philosophy. Thus, too, the political economist views the increase and the diminution of those products which constitute national wealth. He traces the various circumstances by which either the one or the other may be promoted, and from the observation of individual examples and instances, he lays down general principles for the regulation of future conduct in affairs of state economy. This constitutes the philosophy of the science. Political economy bears the same relation to history as morals do to biography. History records those facts which have occurred in the affairs of nations. From these facts, political economy derives her principles. She arranges these facts, not according to their chronological order, but according as they concurred in exhibiting the good or evil of any line of political conduct. So biography records those events that have occurred in the lives of individuals, and the moralist hence derives principles for the regulation of individual conduct. All philosophy, whether it refer to material or immaterial subjects, is founded on fact. It is not philosophy to build castles in the air, to fancy theories, and then maintain them in defiance of evidence. If we wish to lay any claim to the character of philosophers, we must not first assume principles, and then hunt for facts in order to establish them, but our principles must be deductions from the facts with which we were previously acquainted. When, however, the facts by which our principles are supported are so numerous or so decisive that few persons are disposed to dispute the conclusion to which they lead, it is not always necessary, in teaching our general principles, to detail all the individual facts upon which they may be founded. A few pertinent examples are sufficient for the purpose. From what I have said, none of my auditors will be at a loss to conjecture what ideas I attach to the philosophy of history. The philosophy of history means those general principles which the facts of history clearly establish. It is not, therefore, my intention to detail all the events which are recorded in the page of history. I shall attempt to exhibit those principles which are deduced from those events, and shall consider those events themselves, not in their chronological order, but as they tend to establish the principles I had previously advanced. The philosophy of history takes a much wider range than political economy. The economist views only those facts which have an influence on the accumulation of national wealth. The philosopher views also those facts which have a reference to the character of man, to the development of his physical powers, the exercise of his intellectual faculties, his progress in scientific inquiry, the formation of domestic and civil society, and his performance of moral and religious duties. In pursuing these inquiries, I propose to deliver 5 lectures. First will be on the philosophy of geographical history, the second, the philosophy of domestic history, the third, the philosophy of intellectual history, the fourth, the philosophy of political history, fifthly, the philosophy of ecclesiastical history. In the first lecture, upon the philosophy of geographical history, I propose to inquire what are the effects which history records to have been produced upon man and upon human society by geographical circumstances, by the varieties of climate, by the mountainous character of countries, by the fertility or barrenness of the soil, or by the intervention of rivers or arms of the sea. In the second lecture, I shall inquire what is the language of history as to the relation of husband and wife, the institutions of polygamy and divorce, the relation between parents and children, masters and servants, and the rise and progress of domestic slavery. This lecture will be on the philosophy of domestic history. In the third lecture, on the philosophy of intellectual or scientific history, I shall inquire into the circumstances which have developed the intellectual faculties, the rise and progress of the arts, the circumstances by which they are promoted or retarded, the advantages which the moderns have over the ancients, and the benefits to be expected from universal education. In the fourth lecture, upon the philosophy of political history, I shall inquire what is the evidence of history as to the origin of government, the advantages and disadvantages of particular forms of government, and the union of the simple forms in the British Constitution. In the fifth lecture, upon the philosophy of ecclesiastical history, I propose to examine whether it is obvious from history that man is endowed with a moral sense, to inquire what are the different forms of polytheism, and how far it is necessary that the Church should be established by the civil power, and to trace the influence of religion upon the political, intellectual, and social happiness of man. We shall now point out some of the different ways in which logic is applied to history. 1. Logic is applied to history in examining the evidence either for or against the truth of disputed facts. Without this exercise of the reasoning faculties, books will as often mislead as instruct us. In making an estimate of the authenticity of historical relations, 3 principal rules are to be observed: the probability or improbability of the facts recorded, the nature of the evidence attesting them, and in what degree they are corroborated or contradicted by the general circumstances of the world in the period of time alluded to. On these principles, the reader must exercise a discretionary power of yielding or suspending his belief, but he ought carefully to avoid the 2 extremes of skepticism and credulity, which are equally inimical to the improvement of the human mind. Bigland's Letters on History. There is a minuteness in the details of the Mosaic writings which argues their truth, for it often argues the eyewitness, as in the Adventures of the Wilderness, and often seems intended to supply directions to the artificer, as in the constructions of the tabernacle. There are touches of nature in the narrative which argue its truth, for it is not easy to regard them otherwise than as strokes from the life, as where the mixed multitude, whether half-castes or Egyptians, are the first to sigh for the cucumbers and melons of Egypt, and to spread discontent through the camp, as the miserable exculpation of himself, which Aaron attempts with all the cowardice of conscious guilt. I cast into the fire, and there came out this calf, the fire, to be sure, being in the fault. There is a candor in the treatment of his subject by Moses, which argues his truth, as when he tells of his own want of eloquence, which unfitted him for a leader, his own want of faith, which prevented him from entering the promised land, the idolatry of Aaron his brother, the profaneness of Nadab and Abihu, his nephews, the disaffection and punishment of Miriam, his sister, the relationship with Amram his father bore to Jochebed his mother, which became afterwards one of the prohibited degrees in the marriage tables of the Levitical law. Blunt's Scriptural Coincidences. 2. Logic is applied to history in discussing the characters of distinguished men. If Alexander had not been at the head of such an army, and assisted by the counsels and exhortations of such commanders as Parmenio, Lysimachus, Antigonus, Perdiccas, Craterus, Ptolemy, and others, or if he had turned his arms westward against the warlike Romans instead of the effeminate Persians, his affairs would, in all probability, have assumed a very different aspect, and he would scarcely have shown in the page of history as the invincible conqueror. But every observing and intelligent reader of history cannot but see that in this war the circumstances of the 2 belligerent nations, and the state of their armies, were such that a general of ordinary abilities in Alexander's place could hardly have failed of success. Possessing all the advantages of an excellent literary and military education, and endowed by nature with courage, magnanimity, and genius, Alexander appears to have been capable of the greatest things, but we can only estimate his political and military character by what he actually performed. And in this estimation we must allow that, every circumstance duly considered, Alexander's achievements were a much less arduous task than those of many other warriors, whose successes have been far less brilliant, and whose names shine with a much less dazzling luster. It must, however, be confessed that some of Alexander's projects are characteristic of a political and commercial, as well as a warlike genius, and redound more to his honor than his mad career of conquest. His foundation of the city of Alexandria in a situation so extremely favorable to commerce seems to indicate an extensive view of the advantages accruing from trade, and the flourishing state of that city, both while it continued the capital of an independent kingdom, and afterwards under the Roman and Byzantine empires, displays the justness of his understanding in the choice of so excellent a situation for a great mercantile city. His sending out his admiral Nearchus to explore the coasts of Persia and India also shows that he was actuated by a spirit of discovery as well as an avidity of conquest, and if he had attained to an advanced age, it is not possible to conceive what he might have performed when, the best parts of the world being subdued, conquest could no longer have presented to him the same allurements. Bigland's Letters on History. End of section 47. Section 48 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Catrina. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The Application of the Art of Reasoning to History, Part 2. 3. Logic is applied to history in drawing parallels or contrasts between persons or epochs or events. England under Cromwell was in a high state of general prosperity. Its domestic commerce prospered. Cromwell was the chief founder of our maritime greatness. The seas were swept of all obstruction to an unprecedented freedom of trade. The merchants who had ordered the most costly goods from abroad could rest in quiet and contentment until the appointed time for their expected arrival, or, having shipped some of their most costly produce for distant lands, they could indulge in a well-grounded confidence that, at the appointed time, the needful equivalent would arrive. This wonderful confidence derived its chief strength from the fact that the great name of Cromwell was a mighty safeguard to property both at home and abroad, a very terror to all evildoers as well as on sea as on the land. Learning prospered. An illustration of this it will be enough to contemplate the state of Oxford under the vice-chancellorship of Dr. Owen. There was liberty at home and abroad. Of the principles of equity and toleration which the Protector had established in England, he became the great champion and defender in foreign lands. I certainly could not divine what Oliver Cromwell would do, were he now at the head of the government of these kingdoms, but it were easy to know what he would not do. He would not have submitted your institutions to Rome for the consideration, revision, and approval of an Italian priest. He would not compel the people of Great Britain, out of their hard earnings, to pay £30,000 a year to the support of Maynooth. He would not have meddled with the foundation of those new empires now rising up in our colonial dominions, by supporting, at the cost of England, Romish priests and bishops, and by erecting from the same source popish chapels and schools. He would not have allowed of any unconstitutional papal aggression. He would not allow British subjects to suffer persecution, or lie unbefriended in remote inquisitions on account of their religion. He would not be at a loss to know was the papal system a religious system or a secular system, half religious or half secular. He would not have been at a loss to know how to deal with Cardinal Wiseman. Such is what Oliver Cromwell would not have done in England of the 17th century, and such, in some respects, is what he would have done. Say, do we or do we not want a man of similar policy, and of a kindred fortitude for England of the 19th century? Do we or do we not, is the question. Let the remarkable times, now passing over us, declare. Rev. Joseph Denham Smith's lecture on Oliver Cromwell, or England in the past viewed in relation to England in the present. 4. Logic is applied to history in considering the wisdom or justice of individual acts. Although historians may conjecture that the removal of the imperial residence contributed to hasten the downfall of the empire, it is a certain fact that the fixing of it at Constantinople put a final period to the passage of the barbarians through the Bosphorus, who could never after force that insurmountable barrier, and Greece, as well as Asia Minor, was secure from their ravages, until Valens unadvisedly suffered the Goths to pass the Danube, and received their armed bands into the heart of the empire. In after ages Constantinople presented an insurmountable obstacle to the progress of the Persians under Chosroes, and resisted all the attacks of the Avars, the Goths, and other northern enemies. During the existence of the Caliphate, That city was the bulwark of Europe against the Saracens, and fell a prey to the Turks so late as A.D. 1453, 1043 years after Rome was taken and plundered by Alaric, and 977 years after the entire subversion of the Western Empire. Indeed, no good reason can be given why the empire might not have been as well defended, when Constantinople was the capital, as if Rome had always retained that prerogative, and it is no improbable conjecture that if the imperial residence had not been removed to Constantinople, all the eastern parts of the empire would have fallen a prey to the Persians, on the one hand, and to the Goths on the other, without prolonging for any considerable time the existence of the Western Empire. Bigland's Letters on History. 5. Logic is applied to history in tracing the adaptation or effects of particular laws or institutions. The Hebrew laws concerning debt were remarkably different, in many respects, from those which prevail in European countries. This difference probably arose in a great degree from the peculiarities in the condition of the people, but, however this be, their singularity, their high antiquity, and the sanction under which they come to us, recommend them to greater attention than they seem generally to have received. It will be recollected that it was provided that, as soon as Palestine was conquered, there should not be one individual without property. Every one had his hereditary land, which he might alienate until the 50th year, but not forever. Poverty, therefore, could rarely prevent the ultimate safety of what was advanced in loan, and of an insolvent debtor, destitute of property on which execution could be made, the Hebrew could scarcely have an idea. The following useful summary of these laws is from T.H. Horn, who seems to have condensed it from Michaelis. It will serve as an index to the various details which we shall consider separately, as they hereafter come under our notice. The debt which remained unpaid until the 7th or Sabbatic year, during which the soil remained without cultivation, and, consequently, a person was supposed not to be in a condition to make payments, could not be exacted during that period. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 1 through 11. But at other times, in case the debt was not paid, the creditor might seize, first, the hereditary land of the debtor, and enjoy its produce till the debt was paid, or at least until the year of Jubilee, or, secondly, his houses. These might be sold in perpetuity, except those belonging to the Levites. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 14 through 32. Thirdly, in case the house or land was not sufficient to cancel the debt, or if it so happened that the debtor had none, the person of the debtor might be sold, together with his wife and children, if he had any. This is implied in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 39, and this custom is alluded to in Job chapter 24, verse 9. It existed in the time of Elisha, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. And on the return of the Jews from their Babylonish captivity, some rich persons exercised this right over their poor debtors. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1 through 13. Our Lord alludes to the same custom in Matthew chapter 18, verse 25. As the person of the debtor might thus be seized and sold, his cattle and furniture might consequently be liable for his debts. This is alluded to by Solomon in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 27. It does not appear that imprisonment for debt existed in the age of Moses, but it seems to have prevailed in the time of Jesus Christ. Pictorial Bible, note on Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 2. 6. Logic is applied to history in observing the rise and progress of arts and sciences. At the close of the 15th century, an extraordinary activity was reigning in Europe. Bold investigations were remarkable everywhere. A general yearning for truer, more real science was manifest. This movement continued during the greater part of the 16th century without results, owing to the absence of unity and method. A confusion also ensued, arising from the revival of the systems of antiquity and the mystical philosophy so pregnant with fruitless efforts. In the meantime, however, new discoveries gave a fresh impulse to the human mind. Copernicus described the true system of the world. Kepler somewhat foreshadowed the discoveries of Newton. Tycho Brahe was collecting the most invaluable observations. Then came Lord Bacon, whose great genius dissipated the mists of error and broke down the obstacles which impeded advancement in useful science. His works present an estimate on the actual attainment in all the sciences, a catalogue of the desiderata in each department, and the detail of the methods best suited to prosecute improvements and new discoveries. The world owes to Bacon the sure method of advancing in knowledge by experiment and the observation of nature, instead of system and conjecture. Bacon, said Horace Walpole, has been the prophet of truths that Newton came to reveal to mankind. True, but between Bacon and Newton, a man arose who followed the track of Bacon, and inflicted a mortal blow on all systems, who created a new method and a general theory of the world. We allude to Descartes, who was the first to lay down the laws of motion, especially that all bodies persist in their present state of rest or uniform rectilineal motion till affected by some force. Galileo, in 1609, constructed telescopes and discovered the satellites of the larger planets. Kepler investigated the laws which regulate the motions of the planets and the analogy between their distances from the sun and periodical revolutions. The discoveries in astronomy led to improvements in navigation and a great advancement of geometry in all its branches. Napier, in 1614, abridged calculation by the invention of logarithms. The Torselian experiments determined the weight of the atmosphere. In 1616, Harvey discovered the circulation of the blood. The Royal Society was incorporated in 1662. The Royal Academy of Sciences was instituted by Louis XIV in 1666, and similar institutions were founded in most of the countries of Europe. In the end of the 17th century arose the immortal Newton and Leibniz, the universal genius. Newton had discovered, before the age of 24, the theory of universal gravitation, a principle which solves the chief phenomena of nature, and connects and regulates the whole machine of the universe. His theory of light and colors is the foundation of the science of optics, and his Principia the basis and elements of all philosophy. Locke, his contemporary, investigated the operations of the human mind, and examined the soul by attending to its operations, and has been, a priori, the founder of the sensualist school of intellectual philosophy. Historical Analysis of Christian Civilization by Professor de Vericourt, Queen's College, Cork. 7. Logic is applied to history in observing the remarkable occurrences with regard to individuals or nations. It is, however, a remarkable fact that some of the greatest men, in both ancient and modern times, have been extremely unhappy in their domestic concerns. The rebellion of Absalom against his father David, and its tragical issue, the murder of Sennacherib in the temple of the god Nisroch by the hands of his own sons, Adramelech and Sherazar, the severities which Augustus Caesar was obliged to use against his only child, his daughter Julia, on account of her scandalous life, and the havoc which Herod the Great made in his own family by the execution of his beautiful and beloved wife Mariamne, his two most promising sons, and others of his near relatives, may be adduced as instances, among a great number of others which occur in ancient history. The highest degrees of human power, that exaltation and splendor, do not always exempt their possessors from domestic infelicity, no more than from personal misfortunes and the ordinary sufferings of mortality. To these instances, and many others in ancient history, may be added a number of similar nature, in more modern times, among which the tragical catastrophe of Don Carlos, son of Philip II of Spain, and that of the Tsarewitz, son of the immortal Peter the Great, of Russia, stands as conspicuous and distinguished proofs of the uncertain and fluctuating nature of all human felicity. Bigland's Letters on History. 8. Logic is applied to history in deducing general principles in the science of politics. Much has been said by many writers against the pernicious effects of extensive empire, but many arguments may also be adduced in its favor. The union of a numerous mass of people in one political system is one of the surest preservatives of war, and the division of countries into a greater number of independent states is a never failing source of predatory hostilities, of bloodshed, rapine, and anarchy. Wherever a country is thus divided, such a multiplicity of jarring interests arise, and so many objects of ambition present themselves, as cannot fail of producing continual scenes of contention, originating in the ambition, the avarice, and the jarring interests of the rulers or the subjects, which involve the people in all sorts of calamities. Instances without number might be adduced, but a glance at the state of England during the time of the Heptarchy will suffice to exemplify the propriety of this observation. In an extensive monarchy there is only one great political interest, and the objects of ambition, however splendid and attractive, are fewer, and consequently within the reach of a smaller number of persons. In such a state all tends to one central point, instead of deviating to different centers. The vast collective mass of the people is united in one political system, and in one general interest, and the different provinces which compose the empire enjoy the advantages of a free and uninterrupted commerce, a circumstance of incalculable benefit both to individuals and to the whole community. Supposing even an extensive monarchy to be despotic, and the monarch himself a sanguinary and unfeeling tyrant, yet, by reason of the extent of his dominions, only a few individuals, who most of them voluntarily bring themselves into contact with him, feel the effects of his cruelty and despotism. Those who, from motives of ambition or interest, approach his person, and serve him as the instruments of his tyranny, are the persons who principally feel the heavy hand of the tyrant. The great mass of the people feel its pressure in a much lighter degree. Distance of situation, and the great multitude of subjects, cause individuals to escape his notice. The reverse is the case in petty states, where the eye of the tyrant is always upon the individuals of his contracted dominions, and a tyrant at the distance of 1,000 miles is infinitely preferable to a tyrant at home, at our very doors. The history of mankind affords a multiplicity of proofs that extensive monarchies are more conducive to the tranquillity of the world and the general interests of humanity than petty states. I bid. 9. Logic is applied to history in inculcating the truths and lessons of morality and religion. Besides, it is the history of the Bible which hath conveyed down to us the knowledge of those miracles and divine wonders which have been wrought by the prophets, the immediate messengers of heaven, prove that they were sent of God. It is in this history we read of those prophecies of things to come, together with the accomplishment of them, which stand in a beautiful connection from the beginning of the world to the days of the Messiah. All of them join to confirm our faith in the several revelations of religion which God has made to the sons of men, and all concur to establish the last and noblest scheme of religion, that is, Christianity. Thus, the very history of Scripture has a powerful and rational influence to establish our belief of the gospel, and to make us Christians upon solid and reasonable grounds. I add yet further, that in the historical part of Scripture we read the holy laws of God, exemplified in the life and practice of good men in several ages of the world, and when we see the rules of religion copied out in the words and actions of our fellow creatures, it renders the performance of them more practicable and more delightful to us. While the word of command stands in the law to require our obedience, the actual obedience of our fathers to those commands recorded in the history invites our imitation and makes the work more easy. We find not only the precepts but the sanctions of the laws of God exemplified in the narratives of Scripture. How often do we read the promises of God fulfilled in the rewards of the righteous, and his threatenings executed against wilful transgressors? These things set the government of God before our eyes in a stronger light. They show us that his words of promise and threatening are not empty sounds, and make it appear, with sensible conviction, that he will certainly reward, and that he will as certainly punish. The many wonderful instances of a divine providence which concerns itself in the affairs of men, and which are recorded in the Word of God, have a natural tendency to awaken our fear of so great and glorious a being, and to encourage our hope and trust in him. In a word, the perfections of God, whereby he made and governs the world, are set before our eyes by the Scripture history in such divine colors, as give us a more awful and more amiable idea of God himself than any words of description could have done, without such an historical account of his works of nature, grace, and providence. Dr. Watts' Scripture History. There are many other ways in which logic is applied to history, such, for example, as in the investigation of the causes of great facts, the cause of the spread of Christianity, cause of the rise of Mahometanism, of the Reformation, of the French Revolution, etc., etc. Also, in tracing effects, as the effects of the feudal system, of the Crusades, of the discovery of America, etc., etc. I mentioned to you, at the commencement of my book, that although the mere acquiring of information is not reasoning, yet every fact in history may, in some way or other, become the subject of a reasoning process. End of section 48.
Section 49 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The application of the art of reasoning to political economy. Political economy is the name which is given to the science of wealth. Adam Smith does not use this name, but simply calls his work, quote, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, unquote. A political economist is one who studies or explains the doctrines of political economy. He is not merely one who believes Malthus's theory of the population, Huskisson's system of free trade, Ricardo's theory of rent, and Sir Robert Peel's opinions on the currency. These doctrines do not constitute the science. They are some of the disputed doctrines of the science. He who rejects them is, in our view, as much a political economist as he who maintains them. I am not going to teach you political economy, but merely to give you a few hints as to the use of the art of reasoning in acquiring a knowledge of some of its principles. 1. The art of reasoning, then, will teach you that you should understand clearly the nature of the science you intend to learn. Quote, the science of political economy is intimately connected with the daily occurrences of life, and in this respect differs materially from that of chemistry, astronomy, or any of the natural sciences. The mistakes we may fall into in the latter sciences can have little sensible effect upon our conduct, whilst our ignorance of the former may lead us into serious practical errors. There is scarcely any history or any account of voyages or travels that does not abound with facts and opinions, the bearings of which cannot be understood without some previous acquaintance with the principles of political economy. Besides, should the author himself be deficient in this knowledge, you will be continually liable to adopt his errors from inability to detect them. This science is essentially founded upon history, not the history of sovereigns, of wars, and of intrigues, but the history of the arts, of trade, of discoveries, and of civilization. We see some countries, like America, increase rapidly in wealth and prosperity, whilst others, like Egypt and Syria, are impoverished, depopulated, and falling to decay. When the causes which produced these various effects are well understood, some judgment may be formed of the measures which governments have adopted to contribute to the welfare of their people, whether such or such a branch of commerce should be encouraged in preference to others, whether it be proper to prohibit this or that kind of merchandise, whether any peculiar encouragement should be given to agriculture, whether it be right to establish by law the price of provisions or the price of labor, or whether they should be left without control, and so on. You see, therefore, that political economy consists of two parts, theory and practice, the science and the art. The science comprehends a knowledge of the facts which we have enumerated. The art relates more particularly to legislation, and consists of doing whatever is requisite to contribute to the increase of national wealth, and avoiding whatever would be prejudicial to it." End quote. Mrs. Marsette's Conversations on Political Economy. 2. The art of reasoning will teach you to be systematic and methodical in your studies. Dr. Watts observes in his Improvement of the Mind that, quote, "The best way to learn any science is to begin with a regular system, or a short and plain scheme of that science, well drawn up into a narrow compass, omitting the deeper and more abstruse parts of it." End quote. And he remarks in another place that if a man in his younger days has arranged all his sentiments in any particular order, it will be much more natural and easy for him to continue to dispose all his further requirements in the same order. And he illustrates this by the arrangement of books in a library. When we have accustomed ourselves to any particular arrangement, we can find a book more readily than if they were again to be arranged in even a better order. Recent writers on political economy have usually divided the science into 4 parts: production, distribution, interchange, and consumption. Under the first division, they have considered labor and capital. Under the second, rent, profit, and wages. Under the third, commerce and money. And under the fourth, the consumption of government and that of individuals. It cannot be denied that there is a neatness in this division, and doubtless all the topics of science may be discussed under one or the other of these heads. But perhaps we cannot have a better division of the science than into the nature, the causes, and the effects of national wealth. Under the first head, you might enumerate the articles that constitute wealth. Under the second head, specify the causes. And under the third head, trace the consequences of wealth on the happiness, intelligence, and morals of the population, etc. The main object of a plan is to assist the memory by a systematic arrangement of your knowledge, and the next object is to be able to adjust under some head or division of your plan any additional knowledge you may acquire. The nature of national wealth is thus described by one who was both a poet and a monarch. Quote, "Rid me, and deliver me from the hand of strange children, whose mouth speaketh vanity, and their right hand is a right hand of falsehood, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as cornerstones, polished after the similitude of a palace, that our garners may be full, affording all manner of store, that our sheep may bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our streets, that our oxen may be strong to labor, that there be no breaking in nor going out, that there be no complaining in our streets. Happy is that people, that is in such a case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord." Unquote. Psalms chapter 144, verses 11 through 15. The causes of wealth may be thus enumerated. 1. The physical characteristics of a country are a source of its wealth. Quote, Moses, in describing the land of promise, uses the following language, and, like a skillful orator, fixes upon those points in which Canaan was superior to Egypt. "For the land whither thou goest in to possess, it is not as the land of Egypt, from whence ye came out. But the land is a land of hills and valleys, and drinketh water of the rain of heaven. The Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, and vines, and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey, a land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass." This may be regarded as a negative description of Egypt. The land of Canaan was not, like the land of Egypt, a level country on which there was no rain, but whose fertility was caused by the overflowing of the river. It was a land of hills and valleys, which drank water of the rain of heaven. It was also more picturesque, and afforded everywhere a constant supply of water for themselves and their cattle. For it had brooks of water and fountains springing out of valleys and hills. It not only produced, like Egypt, wheat and barley, but also vines and fig trees and pomegranates and oil olive and honey, which Egypt did not produce. And moreover, Egypt had no mines of copper or of iron. But this is a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass." Unquote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 2. The moral habits of its population are a source of its wealth. Quote, "The hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. The drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags. He that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that followeth after vain persons shall have poverty enough. He that is slothful in his work is brother to him that is a great waster. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold, therefore shall he beg in harvest and have nothing. Love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. Open thine eyes, and thou shalt be satisfied with bread. In all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury." End quote. Book of Proverbs. Every possible advantage of situation may be rendered nugatory by the misconduct of the people. If, instead of availing themselves of these natural advantages and persevering in the steady pursuits of trade, the merchants neglect their business, or have recourse to swindling, or gambling, or smuggling, they will assuredly bring upon themselves the ruin and degradation which such practices never fail to produce. It is by honesty, by industry, by prudence, by perseverance, and by public spirit that nations and cities are made to prosper." Unquote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 3. Political institutions are a source of wealth, such as security of property, a good government, wise laws, and the impartial administration of public justice. Quote, "The right of private property can be secured only by law, and the laws affecting property are more numerous and commercial than in other countries. Because the modes of acquiring and conveying property are more numerous, and the rights of different claimants cannot be so easily defined. Commerce is affected by all laws relating to the production of commercial commodities, the mode of transferring property, the facility of transport, the laying on of taxes, or the punishment of crimes. Besides these general laws, which affect all branches of commerce, there are in many countries laws affecting particular trades or the export and import of particular commodities. End quote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 4. Social institutions are a source of wealth, as mints, banks, post offices, roads, canals, railways, harbors, exchanges, markets, etc., etc. Quote, banking institutions cannot flourish in any society in which property is insecure. In Oriental countries, where the possession of wealth invites the rapacity of the government, people conceal their wealth by burying it in the earth, and hence we read in Scripture of treasures hid in a field. A similar practice prevailed in Europe during the times of the feudal system, and treasure trove was a source of royal revenue, as all the concealed treasure, when found, belonged to the king. In the early ages of Greece, property was very insecure, partly from the turbulence of the people, partly from the incursions of the neighboring states. In this state of society, the temples were employed as banks. People who had got money lodged it with the priests, and the sanctity of the place preserved it from violation. Even hostile tribes would not take this treasure, lest they should incur the vengeance of the deity to whom the temple was consecrated. End quote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 5. Commerce is a source of wealth. Quote, Tyre is thus described in the Holy Scriptures, a joyous city, whose antiquity is of ancient days, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth. Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust, and fine gold as the mire of the street. When the waves went forth out of the seas, thou filledst many people. Thou didst enrich the kings of the earth with the multitude of thy riches and of thy merchandise. Unquote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 6. Manufactures are a source of wealth. Quote, manufacturing nations rise to wealth from the additional value which they give to the raw materials, for there is an immense difference between the value of the raw materials and the value of the same materials in a manufactured state. Thus, for instance, it has been stated that a pound of cotton wool, when spun, has been worth 5 pounds sterling, and when wove into muslin and ornamented in the timber is worth 15 pounds, yielding 5,900% on the raw material. An ounce of fine Flanders thread has been sold in London for 4 pounds. Such an ounce made into lace may be sold for 40 pounds, which is 10 times the price of standard gold, weight for weight. Steel may be made 300 times dearer than standard gold, weight for weight. 6 steel wire springs for watch pendulums weigh 1 grain. To the artist, 7 shillings and 6 pence each, equal to 2 pounds 5 shillings. 1 grain of gold costs only 2 pence. So a service of cut glass, or of fine porcelain, will cost many hundred times the value of the raw materials of which it is composed. End quote. Lectures on Modern Commerce. 7. Colonies are a source of wealth. They are a certain market for your manufactures. They supply you with food and raw materials. They are a place whither your surplus population may immigrate. And, in case of war, they are outposts of defense. Quote, the Greeks established colonies for the purpose of getting rid of a superabundant population, and their colonies soon became independent. The Roman colonies were established partly for the same purpose, and partly for the purpose of acting as garrisons, and thus keeping possession of the countries they had conquered. The Tyrians and Carthaginians established colonies for the purpose of extending their trade. The Tyrians are said to have planted 40 colonies in different parts of the Mediterranean, and the Carthaginians periodically sent out a number of their citizens in new places where they thought an advantageous trade might be opened. End quote. Lectures on Modern Commerce. After noticing the nature and the causes, you may notice the effects of wealth. Quote, "'Tis not correct that the possession of wealth, honestly acquired, has any tendency either to enervate the intellect, to corrupt the morals, or to impair the happiness of man. The fact is the reverse. 'Tis poverty which is the source of crime. 'Tis poverty which is the great barrier to the acquisition of knowledge. 'Tis poverty which is the great source of human woe. If you wish to increase your knowledge, increase your wealth. You will then have more leisure to study, and be better able to purchase the means of instruction. If you wish to increase your virtue, increase your wealth. You will then have a higher character to support, and fewer and less powerful temptations to act dishonorably and disreputably. If you wish to increase your happiness, increase your wealth. You will then have more numerous sources of pleasure, and, above all, you will be able to indulge in the luxury of doing good. Away with the notion that wealth is an evil. If wealth be an evil, industry is a vice, for the tendency of industry is to produce wealth. If wealth be an evil, commerce should be abandoned, for the object of commerce is to acquire wealth. If wealth be an evil, those efforts which are made by benevolence or patriotism to improve the condition of the poor are deserving not of support, but of execration. But wealth is not an evil. However much the doctrine may have been countenanced by mistaken moralists or dreaming poets, it has never been generally acted upon, for it is one opposed to the common sense of mankind. Both to individuals and to nations, wealth is a blessing. It is only when nations become wealthy that the populations are well fed and well clothed, and reside in roomy habitations well furnished. It is only when nations become wealthy that the cities and towns have wide streets, well formed for carriages and for foot passengers, and apparatus for conveying water to every private habitation, and for supplying light in the streets at night. It is only when nations become wealthy that famines are less frequent, epidemic and contagious disorders less fatal, and institutions are formed for relieving the distresses and promoting the education of the poor. It is only when nations have become wealthy that men have leisure for study, that literature flourishes, that science is explored, that mechanical inventions are discovered, and that the fine arts are patronized and encouraged. All these are the effects of wealth." End quote. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 3. The art of reasoning will teach you how to apply general principles to practical cases. The general principles of political economy differ from those of geometry. In the first place, these principles are not self-evident, but are inferences derived by induction from a series of facts. And secondly, they possess only a moral, not a mathematical universality. Quote, "That a free commercial intercourse among different nations would be for their mutual advantage is a proposition which is very generally true, and being so, every proposal for restriction on commerce may be fairly presumed to be inexpedient till the reverse be established. There can, however, be no manner of doubt that there are cases, though but few in number, in which nations would grossly overlook their own interests if they permitted a free intercourse with their neighbors. Suppose, for example, we had a monopoly on the supply of coal. It would not be difficult to show that it would be good policy, with a view to the increase of national wealth and security, either wholly to prohibit or to lay a high duty on its exportation, and so in other instances. The recent history of the theory of population affords a striking instance of the abuse of general principles, or rather of the folly of building exclusively upon one set of principles, without attending to the influence of the antagonist principles by which they are partly or wholly countervailed. The principle of increase, as explained by Mr. Malthus, and more recently by Dr. Chalmers, appeared to form an insuperable obstacle to all permanent improvement in the condition of society, and to condemn the great majority of the human race to a state approaching to destitution. The real difficulty does not lie in discussing matters connected with this science, in the statement of general principles, or in reasoning fairly from them, but it lies in the discovery of the secondary or modifying principles, which are always in action, and in making proper allowance for their influence. Generally, indeed, we may predicate, with considerable confidence, the more immediate results that would follow the adoption of any novel system of measures. But it is extremely difficult, or rather perhaps impossible, without an extensive analogous experience, to foretell its remoter consequences. Because we must, in the absence of such experience, be necessarily in the dark respecting the nature and influence of the modifying principles which a change of measures would no doubt bring into action." End quote. McCullough's Principles of Political Economy. 4. The art of reasoning will teach you the best ways of increasing your knowledge on the subject. In the pursuit of information, you should read chiefly those works that are practically useful. Read such books as Dr. Kane on the Industrial Resources of Ireland, the letters of the commissioners of the Times and Morning Chronicle, the various trade circulars, and the public documents issued by the government. Take every opportunity of going over dockyards, warehouses, and manufactories, and there trace the production of commodities from the raw material to the finished article. And be sure you go to the Industrial Exposition. Get a catalog beforehand and mark those things you intend more minutely to inspect. This will save your time when you arrive, and you will be able to employ your opportunities more effectively and profitably. When you read history, you will observe that the sources of natural wealth were as well understood in ancient as in modern times. That more corn could be produced from the soil than was necessary for the wants of the population, and the surplus could be sold to foreigners, was as well known in Egypt and Sicily as it is now known in Poland and Canada. The effect of manufactures to produce wealth was as well understood in Tyre and Corinth as it is now in Birmingham and Manchester. Ships, colonies, and commerce were as highly appreciated at Athens and at Carthage as they have since been at Amsterdam and London. And the Romans knew the advantages to be gained by facility of intercourse, as well as it is now known by the advocates of our modern railways. And with regard to moral causes, that industry, frugality, and prudence are the road to wealth, is as distinctly taught in the Proverbs of Solomon as in any of our modern systems of political economy, and the denunciations of the prophets against fraud, robbery, injustice, and oppression are proofs that they taught the doctrine that security of property is essential to national prosperity. I advise you thus to study political economy. Study it because it is interesting and will form an agreeable recreation to your reasoning faculties. Study it because it concerns the welfare of others, and a new discovery of any important principle may cause you to become a public benefactor. Study it because it contains no principles adverse to morality and religion, and the investigation of its doctrines is not attended with that danger to which weak minds are exposed by the study of the abstract principles of morals and metaphysics. Study it because it will lead your mind into the contemplation of divine wisdom and goodness, manifested no less in the organization of society than in the construction of the material universe. End of section 49. Read by Brad Morse, Dalton, Georgia, January 2026. Section 50 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The application of the art of reasoning to statistics. 1. The nature and extent of the science of statistics is thus described in the 6th Annual Report of the Statistical Society of London. Quote, the first sentence of the Prospectus of the Society, issued in 1834, which states that the object of its establishment is to procure, arrange, and publish facts calculated to illustrate the condition and prospects of society, contains perhaps the best definition of statistics which has yet been attempted, and if it be imperfect, its imperfection assuredly consists in it being not too narrow, but too comprehensive. Statistics, as thus defined, and as a branch of study worthy of our efforts, are assuredly not the mere method of stating the observations and experiments of the physical or other sciences, as seems in some instances to have been supposed. Such was not the duty assigned to this society by its founders. It was not to perfect the mere art of tabulating that it was embodied. It was not to make us hewers and drawers to those engaged on any edifice of physical science. But it was that we should ourselves be the architects of a science or of sciences, the perfecters of some definite branch or branches of knowledge, which should do honor to ourselves and our country, and at the same time to the distinguished men who summoned us to the labor, the elaborators, in fine, of truths which we feel to be necessary to our happiness, but which are yet wholly hidden from us, or but partially revealed. The whole field of our labors appears to be divisible into the following chief sections. First, the statistics of physical geography, division, and appropriation, or geographical and proprietary statistics. Second, the statistics of production, or agricultural, mining, fishing, manufacturing, and commercial statistics. Third, the statistics of instruction, or ecclesiastical, scientific, literary, and academical statistics. Fourth, the statistics of protection, or constitutional, legal, judicial, and criminal statistics. Fifth, the statistics of consumption and enjoyment, or of population, distribution, consumption, diversions, life, health, and public and private charity. End quote. 2. The importance of the science is now universally acknowledged. It is manifested in the attention paid by the government to the register of births, marriages, and deaths, and by the anxiety shown at the present time with regard to the census. It was not always so. The following are extracts from a letter I addressed on the 17th of October, 1823, to the then Prime Minister, the Earl of Liverpool. Quote, under these circumstances, I beg leave to suggest to your lordship the propriety of establishing a public register of all births, not baptisms, marriages, and deaths that may occur in the nation, including all the circumstances of sex, age, and occupation of the parties. The utility of such a measure is obvious. Independently of its use in ascertaining the descent of every individual, and thus preventing disputed successions, it would possess numerous advantages. The system of insurance on lives would be perfected. The influence of different occupations, or of different parts of the country, in extending or abridging the term of human life, would be clearly exhibited. The theories which are now advocated in regard to population would be confuted or confirmed. A variety of useful truths, equally curious and important, would be elicited, and the science of political economy, instead of resting on probability and conjecture, would be founded on the rock of mathematical certainty. It would then be easy to ascertain the exact number of each respective class, or of any given age in society, and the information thus obtained might be usefully applied to subjects connected with taxation, to quotas required for military service, and to a variety of other subjects. Had such a register been established 3 centuries ago, what a fund of knowledge would it supply? What a number of tedious and expensive lawsuits would have been prevented? How many visionary theories would have been suppressed? How distinctly should we be able to trace the progress of national prosperity? And how highly should we esteem the author of so useful a regulation? End quote. Population of Great Britain. Males, 1841, 9,077,004. 1851, 10,192,721. Rate percent of increase, 12%. Females, 1841, 9,581,368. 1851, 10,743,747. Rate percent of increase, 12%. Total of Great Britain and islands in the British Seas, 1841, 18,658,372. 1851, 20,936,468. Rate percent of increase, 12%. Population of Ireland. Males, 1841, 4,019,576. 1851, 3,176,727. Rate percent of decrease, 20%. Females, 1841, 4,155,548. 1851, 3,339,067. Rate percent of decrease, 20%. Total, 1841, 8,175,124. 1851, 6,515,794. Rate percent of decrease, 20%. Population of the United States of America. United States free population, 31 states. 1841, 17,064,688. 1851, 23,347,884. Rate percent of increase, 36.8%. Slave ditto in 16 states. 1841, 2,468,138. 1851, 3,178,055. Rate percent of increase, 29.4%. 3. The facts with which this science is conversant are those which are susceptible of being represented and registered by figures. Its arithmetical operations are chiefly multiplication and division, the calculation of ratios, and the construction of tables. In treating of the relation of a whole and its parts, in the second section of the second part of this work, I have observed that we employ multiplication when we wish to magnify the importance of any matter, and division when we wish to produce a contrary effect. Thus, if a party wished to show that the established church is in possession of enormous wealth, he would endeavor to obtain an account of all ecclesiastical property and present it in one sum. But if another party wished to produce a different impression, he would divide this sum by the number of clergymen, and contend that upon an average they do not receive, individually, a higher income than an educated man should receive for the kind of duty he performs. It was a simple multiplication that Mr. G.R. Porter ascertained the amount spent annually in the purchase of spirits, beer, and tobacco, sums which he happily styled, quote, self-imposed taxes, end quote. The following is the amount taken from the paper he read on the subject at Edinburgh before the statistical section of the British Association. British and colonial spirits, 20,810,208 pounds. Brandy, 3,281,250 pounds. Total of spirits, 24,091,458 pounds. Beer of all kinds, exclusive of that brewed in private families, 25,383,165 pounds. Tobacco and snuff, 7,588,607 pounds. Total self-imposed taxes, 57,063,230 pounds. When we wish to compare a number of things together in some one respect, we employ a ratio. The ratio usually employed is a percentage. For example, if we wish to show the number of crimes in each county or district as compared with its population, we should place in one column the population of each county and in an adjoining column the number of crimes in each county. We should then reduce these figures to a ratio. That is, we would by the rule of 3 ascertain what percent in each county the crimes bore to the population. We might then, in making our comparisons, dispense with both the preceding columns and place against the name of each county its percentage of crime. A series of figures may be placed either longitudinally or horizontally. In the former case, they are called a column of figures, and in the latter case, a row of figures. A table of figures combines both. Several columns of figures are placed side by side, but at the same time there is a connection between all these columns horizontally. Such a table admits of being added together in two ways. You may add longitudinally and place at the bottom the amount of each column, and you may add horizontally and place in a column at your right hand the separate amount of each row. You will understand what I mean by the following table, which I have taken from The Statistical Companion, published by T.C. Banfield and C.R. Weld of the Royal Society. Classified abstracts of the numbers of electors in the counties, cities, and boroughs of Great Britain for the year 1846. The total number of registered electors in 1846 was as follows. For England, counties, 475,036. Cities and boroughs, 342,342. Total, 817,378. Wales, counties, 37,340. Cities and boroughs, 11,205. Total, 48,545. Scotland, counties, 48,953. Cities and boroughs, 29,597. Total, 78,550. Totals. Counties, 561,329. Cities and boroughs, 383,144. Total, 944,473. All tables are not drawn up in this form. Some consist only of a series of columns placed side by side without any horizontal connection, and sometimes the columns are not added up longitudinally. 4. From the facts represented and registered by the figures, the statistician endeavors to deduce new truths. There is scarcely a science from which so many useful truths may so readily be drawn as from statistics. By new truths, I mean, of course, truths that are new to us. No truth is new in itself. The doctrine of gravitation was a truth in itself before it was discovered by Newton, but he made us acquainted with it. It is only in this sense that any truth can be new. By statistics, many discoveries have been made, discoveries too of great importance, and made by very simple means. For instance, it was a new discovery in Edinburgh last year that the annual consumption of spirits in Scotland was in the proportion of 11 1/6 gallons to every individual, while in Ireland it was the proportion of 3 1/2 gallons, and in England it was only in the proportion of 2 1/3 gallons. It was also a new truth that the wealth of the lower classes is increasing, and increasing too in a higher proportion than that of the higher classes. For these truths, we are indebted to Mr. Porter. Quote, Proportions of Rich and Poor. In a paper read by Mr. Porter before the British Association, he shows that it is altogether a mistake to suppose that the rich are growing richer and the poor are becoming poorer in this country, for there is abundant evidence of a much larger increase in the numbers of the middle classes than of either the rich or the poor. He states that between 1831 and 1848, there was a great proportionate increase in the number of small dividends paid at the Bank of England to the holders of money in the funds. Also, that the incomes from trades and professions above £150 a year which paid income tax only amounted in 1812 to £21,247,621, whilst in 1848 they amounted to £56,990,224, and that the incomes below £500 a year had increased several millions beyond any other class of incomes. Further, that the personal property on which probate duty was paid increased from £14,757,420 in 1811 to £44,348,721 in 1848, of which the increase was chiefly in the smaller properties. The conclusion of Mr. Porter is justified by these figures, and it is one that should remove the popular prejudice on the subject, a prejudice that is equally painful and mischievous." End quote. These new truths are sometimes discovered by simple multiplication and division, as already shown, sometimes by ratios, and sometimes by placing interesting formation in a tabular form. When our figures are chronological registers of facts, new and highly important truths are sometimes ascertained by merely observing if any specific facts reoccur at certain periods. When we have ascertained any uniformity in the occurrence of certain events, we call that uniformity a law. Thus, those uniformities that were found to occur in regard to the deaths at various ages are now called the laws of mortality. A few years ago, a committee on the House of Commons published the average monthly circulation for several years of the notes that had been issued respectively by the Bank of England, the country banks, the banks of Scotland, and the banks of Ireland. From these returns, Mr. Gilbart deduced what he terms the law of the currency. Quote, "We will take the monthly returns of the circulation for the period that is past, that is, from the end of September 1833 to the end of 1843, and endeavor, by observing their various revolutions, to discover if they are governed by any fixed causes or principles, to ascertain if those principles are uniform in their operation, and if we should discover that the revolutions of the currency are regulated by any uniform principles, we shall call these principles the laws of the currency. We shall begin with that portion of the currency which consists of notes issued by the Bank of England. On looking over the monthly circulation of the Bank of England, given in the table number 34 in the appendix of the report of 1840, we observe that the circulation of the months in which the public dividends are paid is higher than in the subsequent months. Thus, the average circulation of January is higher than that of February or March. The circulation of April is higher than that of May or June. The circulation of July is higher than that of August or September. And the circulation of October is higher than that of November or December. This, then, we may consider as one law of the circulation of the Bank of England, that it ebbs and flows 4 times in the year, in consequence of the payment of the quarterly dividends. This law does not apply to any other bank, as all the government dividends are paid by the Bank of England. On inspecting the monthly returns of the country circulation for the last 10 years, we find that the highest amount is in the month of April. Thence it descends and arrives at the lowest point by the end of August, which is the lowest point in the year. It gradually increases to November. A slight reaction takes place in December, but then it advances until it reaches the highest point in April. The general law is that the country circulation always makes one circuit in the year, being at its lowest point in August and advancing to December, and continuing to advance to its highest point in the month of April, and then again descending to its lowest point in August. In Scotland, the lowest point of the circulation is in March and the highest in November. The advance, however, between these 2 points is not uniform, for the highest of the intervening months is May, after which there is a slight reaction, but it increases again until November and falls off in December. The reason of the great increase in May and November is that these are the seasons of making payments. The interest due on mortgages is then settled. Annuities are then paid. The country people usually take the interest on their deposit receipts, and the servants receive their wages. There are frequently large sums transferred by way of mortgage. It is the custom of Scotland to settle all transactions, large as well as small, by banknotes, not by checks on bankers as in London. It is remarkable that these monthly variations occur uniformly every year, while the amount of the circulation in the corresponding months of different years undergoes comparatively little change. From what we have already said of the laws of the currency, those of our readers who are acquainted with Ireland will be able to judge beforehand of the revolutions of her circulation. Being purely an agricultural country, the lowest points will of course be in August or September, immediately before the harvest and the commencement of the cattle and bacon trade. Then it rises rapidly till it reaches its highest point in January and then gradually declines. As an agricultural country, we should naturally expect that during the season of increase the circulation would expand most in the rural districts, and so we find that the circulation of the Bank of Ireland in Dublin expands very moderately. That of her branches, which are located chiefly in large towns, expands more, while the circulation of the joint stock banks, which are located in the agricultural districts, receives the largest increase. Again, the purchases and sales of agricultural produce are known to be in small amounts, and hence the notes of the smallest denomination receive the largest relative increase. The annual changes of the Irish circulation are governed chiefly by the produce of the harvest and the prices of agricultural products. These are the laws of the circulation of Ireland. End quote. Gilbart's Practical Treatise on Banking. The figures which represent tangible objects often indicate truths of an intellectual and moral character. Thus, if we found that the consumption of spirits had decreased in a district, while the consumption of tea and coffee had increased, we should infer that the population had become more temperate. And if the number of schools had increased, we should infer that the people had become better instructed. The following statistics from Dickens's Household Words are an indication of the intelligence of the inhabitants of London. Quote, the area of a single morning paper, the Times, say, is more than 19.5 square feet, or nearly 5 feet by 4. Compared with an ordinary octavo volume, the quality of matter daily issued is equal to 300 pages. There are 4 morning papers whose superficies are nearly as great, without supplements, which they seldom publish. A 5th is only half the size. We may reckon, therefore, that the constant craving of the Londoners for news is supplied every morning, with as much as would fill about 1,200 pages of an ordinary novel, or not less than 5 volumes. The relation of cause and effect has a close connection with statistics. Indeed, we may almost give the same definition of statistics which has been given of philosophy, the science which teaches the causes of things. We discover the causes of things in various ways. Sometimes statistics will merely give us the facts, and we have to ascertain the causes from other sources. Thus, we have fluctuation in the prices of corn, of the funds, and we have to judge of the causes. Here, there is much room for difference of opinion. For instance, statistics will tell us that there was a great fall in the price of the funds in February 1848. History will tell us that just before this occurred the Revolution in France. What we may therefore infer with confidence that the French Revolution was the cause of a decline in the English funds. But generally, the relation of cause and effect is less obvious and less sudden, and consequently there is more occasion for sound reasoning. Sometimes the causes of things are discovered by taking two similar series of figures from two different localities. Thus, at the time of the cholera, the number of deaths was registered in a district where the people drank impure water, and in another district where the people drank pure water. And as the deaths were far more numerous in the former locality, it was inferred that impure water produced the cholera. So in India, the number of deaths from disease in the different regiments stationed in different parts of India were ascertained, and it was inferred that in the places where the deaths were most numerous, the climate was most unhealthy. Sometimes the causes of things are discovered by taking similar series of facts at different periods. Thus, the number of letters passed through the post office before the adoption of the penny postage and subsequent to that event will show the effect of that measure in increasing the number of letters. Sometimes causes are shown by two series of figures, one representing the effect and the other the cause. Thus, if we have from various districts a series of figures showing the number of schools in each district, and another column of figures showing the number of crimes committed in each district, and if we find that generally the number of crimes is in an inverse proportion to the number of schools, we may then infer that want of education is the cause of crime. Causes are often discovered by various and minute classifications. We ascertain the number of people that die annually out of a given population. With this knowledge, only we should do as the amicable insurance did when first established, charge the same premium on all lives indiscriminately. But we classify this total according to their ages, and hence we can charge a premium proportionate to the age. We go further and classify the male and female lives, and again we vary our premiums. We may again subdivide according to the districts and ascertain how far the probabilities on life in the country vary from those in the cities. Again, we may classify according to employments and ascertain the influence of employments on the duration of human life. So, we may take a number of criminals and classify them according to their antecedents, that is, according to their previous circumstances in regard to age, residence, employment, character of parents, education, etc., etc., and hence attempt to discover those circumstances that lead to the formation of character and therefore tend to produce crime. The principle of classification, that is, of genus and species, is of very extensive use in statistics, and we can rarely apply it in any case without obtaining some important information. This remark is illustrated in the following table from the Statistical Companion. National debt, numbers and classification of fundholders. Amount of dividend each person was entitled to receive. Not exceeding £5. Persons entitled to receive dividends October 10th, 1846, 50,008. Persons entitled to receive dividends October 10th, 1847, 51,609. Not exceeding £10, 1846, 24,978. 1847, 25,274. Not exceeding £50, 1846, 53,829. 1847, 54,145. Not exceeding £100, 1846, 13,119. 1847, 13,087. Not exceeding 200 pounds. 1846, 6,893. 1847, 6,889. Not exceeding 300 pounds. 1846, 1,903. 1847, 1,917. Not exceeding 500 pounds. 1846, 1,225. 1847, 1,203. Not exceeding 1,000 pounds. 1846, 529. 1847, 520. Not exceeding 2,000 pounds. 1846, 164. 1847, 163. Exceeding 2,000 pounds. 1846, 92. 1847, 97. The total for October 10th, 1846 is 152,740. The total for October 10th, 1847 is 154,904, showing that the number of persons thus entitled to dividends on the 10th October 1847 was 2,164 more than at the same period of last year, by far the largest portion of the increase being in the smallest amounts. End of Section 50. Read by Brad Morse. Dalton, Georgia, January 2026.
Section 51 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Rusty Pistols. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. 6. In reply to a statistical argument, Mr. Canning exclaimed, "Not figures, but facts. All figures should represent facts. But we cannot deny that even the facts represented by figures may, like other facts, become the basis of erroneous reasoning. Our reasoning may be erroneous from the inaccuracy of the data. In some cases, no records may have been kept, and hence we have no authenticated facts. From this cause, our reasoning may be defective respecting the populousness of ancient nations, the average duration of life in the Middle Ages, the amount of the revenue the Pope derived from England previous to the Reformation. Sometimes, when records have been kept, they are defective. Thus, the produce of the gold and silver mines in America and in Russia has been calculated from the amount of the duty paid to the state. But, of course, we have no record of the cases in which the duty has been evaded. We have records of the importation of tobacco, but we can have no records of the quantity introduced by smugglers. We know the quantity of spirits that paid duty in Great Britain and Ireland every year, but we have no records of the illicit distillation. So in taking our series of figures from different countries, we are liable to error in making comparisons between those things to which these series of figures may respectively refer. The prices of commodities, for instance, though referring to things called by the same name, may not refer to the things of the same kind or the same quality. In comparing the wages of different countries, we may be led astray, for the quantity of labor rendered in return for these respective rates of wages may very much differ. When the union between England and Ireland was under consideration in the House of Commons, Mr. Wilberforce presented a petition from the woolen manufacturers of Yorkshire, praying to be protected against the low wages of Ireland. It was presumed that if woolen manufacturers were established in Ireland, they would be able, from the low rate of wages, to undersell those of Yorkshire. Certain duties called union duties were accordingly continued for 20 years. But though those duties have ceased for 30 years, the woolen manufacturers, notwithstanding the low wages, have shown no disposition to take flight from Leeds to Galway. We are sometimes led astray in making comparisons between two series of figures by confining our attention simply to the figures without noticing the different circumstances of the respective periods to which those figures refer. Thus, During the commercial pressure of 1847, the Chancellor of the Exchequer stated to some deputations that waited upon him on the subject that the restrictions on the issue of banknotes by the Act of 1844 could not be the cause of the pressure, for the amount of notes then in circulation was higher than it had been in former years when no pressure existed. It was afterwards stated before the Parliamentary Committee that of the notes in circulation above £4 million were locked up in the vaults of London and country bankers, as a provision for any demand that might be made upon them for payment of their notes or deposits. Sometimes, as we have stated, two series of figures will, by their correspondence, show that the facts denoted in one series are the cause of the facts denoted in the other series. But this will not be uniformly the case. We cannot always conclude that because two rows of figures increase simultaneously, therefore the facts registered by one series of figures are the cause of the facts registered in the other series. The Morning Chronicle produced two series of figures, the one showing the increase in the number of boys who attended the ragged schools, the other showing the increase in the number of juvenile culprits brought before the police magistrate. It seems that within the same period of time both the series of numbers had increased. It was therefore inferred that the establishment of the ragged schools had been the cause of an increase in the number of juvenile thieves. In reply to this inference, the Christian Times observes, as to the specific value of the statistical figures of the Morning Chronicle, we conceive the utmost merit that can be allowed them is to consider them another ingenious illustration of the frequent fallacy, cum hoc propter hoc. For more they can never pass, since they have not a whit better claim to be regarded as proofs than the declaration of a country cousin of ours the other day, who maintained that England had been falling ever since apple dumplings on the Sunday went out of fashion. Our contemporary might, with equal truth, have shown that the increase of juvenile delinquency had kept pace with the increase of railway traffic, or with the sale of Banbury cakes, or the new discovery of apricot lozenges, or with the use of the magnetic telegraph. And there would have been this advantage in these comparisons, that they are facts. Many things have a coexistence and preserve a marvelous ratio in their increments, and yet have not the remotest connection as cause and effect. And this, we are convinced, is the predicament of the accidental co-increase of juvenile rogueries and ragged schools. Another case in which statistics have been found to be at fault is in regard to the future. No one can doubt the beneficial effects of the penny postage. Yet it cannot be denied that those calculations which were made to show that this measure would increase the revenue of the state have not been realized. So those calculations which were made a few years ago by distinguished statisticians as to the lowest price at which foreign corn could be imported into England have not hitherto turned out to be correct. Perhaps in these cases our reasonings more than our calculations have been fallacious. We may by statistics establish the truth of general principles, and as a general rule, we may assume that the future will resemble the past. But as the influence of general principles is liable to be counteracted by special circumstances, we cannot predict the future without having also a previous knowledge of those special circumstances. It is the business of statistics to calculate, not to prophesy. 7. The following are extracts from the address of the Earl of Harrowby to the Statistical Society of London at the annual meeting held March 15, 1851. It is important in all sciences to know what is to be expected from them, what they can do and what they cannot, and for this purpose it should be always kept in mind that a mere perusal of statistical truths give no short nor royal road to knowledge, but is merely one of the aids to its acquisition. For instance, submit to a man totally ignorant of medicine a table containing a number of facts recorded on a medical subject, and how many false conclusions will he draw from it? He must know more than the number of deaths in the year, or even the enumeration of the diseases, before he dares to draw any conclusions as to the sanitary condition of the place. He must know whether epidemics have prevailed in the year in question, whether war, pestilence, or famine have swelled the usual numbers. It must be remembered that it is only a class of facts. It is not all the facts that can be tabulated, and these are only materials towards a conclusion, requiring themselves a running commentary from the knowledge, judgment, and impartiality of either the man who supplies or the man who reads the tables, without which qualification they not only do not give the whole facts of the case, but absolutely mislead by an appearance of completeness which they do not possess. If, again, we were to take tables with regard to criminals, there is no man who, without considerable knowledge of the legal history, and more than the legal history of the country, would not be misled by the inspection. we would see perhaps a considerable increase in the criminality of the country, but it is desirable to know what was included in the criminality at the beginning of the time and what is now included. What changes have taken place in the laws, how much is now submitted to the public observation which once was not. Whether crimes which once went under greater names and titles now wear lighter ones, and vice versa. Whether the jurisdiction of one tribunal has been transferred to another. Whether matters which formerly were submitted to the adjudication of a formal tribunal are now handed over to a summary jurisdiction. If you come further to details, they are of most essential importance in ascertaining the value of the tables. For the purpose of ascertaining the real fact at issue, which is the real increase or decrease of crime, it is essential to know still more. You must take county by county. In one case, you have a rural police, in another, you have not. In one case, you have a much stricter and more rigorous enforcement of the law than in others. I recollect, on a former occasion, I think at Glasgow, there were comparisons between the different amounts of drunkenness of different towns. Then came the question, what did the magistrates of one town hold to be drunkenness of a kind to be submitted to the law, and what the magistrates of another town held to be such? And rather, an amusing test was submitted for drunkenness which would come within the law, namely, that as long as a man could walk on the curbstone without going off, he was allowed to escape with impunity. But if he could not keep on the curbstone, he immediately was handed over to the proper tribunal. Now, if we were to look at the statistics of circulation alone, the circulation of banknotes by itself, we surely should be very ill-informed as to the amount of means for promoting the exchange of commodities in actual operation, and yet, apparently the bank issues should be considered a sufficient test. But if we look back to the amount of the circulation at the beginning of the present century and see how little it varies from the amount at the present moment, and compare the amount of pecuniary transactions in the one case and in the other, which have to be carried on apparently by the same means of exchange, we should be extremely ill-informed if we did not take into our consideration the immense economy of exchange which has taken place by clearinghouses and bills of exchange, and every kind of mercantile facility which, in fact, makes the circulation, which 50 years ago represented one amount of transactions, to be a very imperfect test for purposes of comparison with the circulation of the present time. We shall conclude this section with some statistics respecting the industrial exhibition. The crystal or glass palace prepared for the World's Fair or Great Industrial Exhibition of 1851 is 1,848 feet long by 456 in width. The height of three roofs is 64, 44, and 24 feet, and that of the transept 108 feet. The ground floor occupies 752,832 superficial or square feet, and the galleries 102,528 feet, making in all an exhibiting surface of some 21 acres with a length of tables of about 8 miles. There are 3,500 cast and wrought iron columns varying from 14.5 to 20 feet in length, 2,224 cast iron girders, and 1,128 supporters for the galleries. The glass necessary to cover this immense building is 900,000 square feet. The length of sash bars is 205 miles, and there are 34 miles of gutters to carry off rainwater to hollow columns, through which it passes into drains or sewers underground. The following return has been compiled from the official list published daily and shows the estimated weekly numbers of visitors and the money taken at the doors from the week ending May 3rd to Saturday, the 30th of August. Following table containing 6 columns: week ending, number, entrance fee, amount received at the doors, estimated number of persons entering with season tickets, total number who enter weekly including the staff, exhibitors, attendants, and the press. May 3rd, 1,042, £1, 1,042 pounds, 49,000, 56,042. May 10, 41,194, 5 shillings, 10,298 pounds, 10 shillings, 77,056, 118,250. May 17, 53,386, 5 shillings, 13,346 pounds, 10 shillings, 80,121, 145,507. May 24, 89,458, 5 shillings, 22,189 pounds, 91,440, 192,869. May 31, 160,857, 1 shilling, 11,123 pounds, 5 shillings, 61,257, 222,114. June 7, 218,799. No entrance fee, £13,694, 2 shillings, 27,129, 245,928. June 14, 206,233, no entrance fee, £12,943, 12 shillings, 32,352, 238,585. June 21, 267,800, no entrance fee, £16,421 and 3 shillings, 35,215, 303,015. June 28, 262,464, no entrance fee, £16,178 and 8 shillings, 30,245, 292,709. July 5, 225,503, no entrance fee, £14,073, 21,436, 246,739. July 12, 265,319, no entrance fee, £16,427, 5 shillings, 23,108, 288,427. July 19, 283,400, no entrance fee, 17,516, 22,453, 305,853. July 26, 255,768, no entrance fees, £15,761, 4 shillings, 18,371, 247,139. August 2, 270,900, no entrance fees, £16,315, 17 shillings, 6 pence, 15,617, 288,519. August 9, 266,770, no entrance fee, £15,440, 14 shillings and 6 pence, 20,001, 286,771. August 16, 236,096, no entrance fees, £14,050, 18 shillings, 6 pence, 15,961, 252,057. August 23, 226,502, no entrance fee, £13,360, 12 shillings, 6 pence, 10,037, 26,539. August 30, 202,808, no entrance fee, £11,860, 7 shillings, 6 pence, 8,638, 211,446. Total number of visitors from May 1 to August 30, 4,205,509. End of section 51.
Section 52 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Adam Roxby by James William Gilbart. Section 52. The application of the art of reasoning to moral philosophy. Moral philosophy has been defined by Paley as the science that teaches men their duty and the reasons of it. It is thus described by Dr. Crowley. Moral philosophy is the teaching of human happiness in the hands of man, as religion is the teaching of human happiness in the hands of the Creator. It is the history of the rules, impulses, and objects of human virtue. It was the earliest of all studies for the obvious reason that it was the most essential. The first associations of man must have felt the value of truth, of a respect for property, and the avoidance of mutual injury. Thus we can expect no practical discoveries in morality, its principles being fixed by the primal necessities of our nature. Still, though no practical difficulties exist in its rules, their grounds, their action, and their objects abound in the most refined problems. The distinction of vice and virtue, the supreme good, the foundation of obedience, the rights of man, the origin of evil, have exercised the subtlest intellect since the days of the illustrious author of the Proverbs. a volume to which may be traced the greater proportion of all the Eastern maxims. The doctrines of the early sages, known as the wise men of Greece, and perhaps the principles of the three greatest scholars, the Platonic, the Stoic, and the Epicurean. With the restoration of learning in Europe, the subject was resumed, and has occupied powerful minds, from the logical acuteness of Hobbes and the profound learning of Cudworth, down to the dexterous simplicity but dubious conclusions of Paley. To be able to give a reason of the hope that is in us is a divine command. Next in importance is to be able to give to ourselves a reason for our duties. But to give that reason requires the study of moral philosophy. National knowledge, national power. In the application of logic to this science, we may observe 1. Logic will teach us that there are moral truths. The first proposition which I assume, and which I wish you to bear in your minds as firmly established, is that there are moral truths. So, however it is, I am solicitous that you should from the very first constantly carry with you the firm conviction and clear appreciation of this proposition. And I venture to say that if there be firmly established in your minds a conviction that there are moral truths, many of the difficulties which arise respecting morality in general will vanish of themselves, or will be easily removed. Perhaps the best way of illustrating this doctrine, that there are moral truths, is by mentioning some of the most simple and familiar propositions of this kind, which are commonly delivered and assented to by men, both on practical occasions and in the course of speculative discussions. Of this kind are the following: that murder, theft, robbery, adultery are wrong, that breach of promise is wrong, that a man cannot liberate himself from the obligation of his own promise, that it is wrong to treat a person as a mere thing, that we must in general recognize the authority of the law of the land, that the law ought to conform to justice, that when a man acts against his conscience, his act is morally wrong. Of this kind, I say, are moral truths. I do not say that all these are certainly moral truths. I do not say this at present, at least. Still less do I say that all these propositions are evidently true, or that they do not admit of limitations and exceptions, but I say that there are moral truths of this kind. If any of those which I have enumerated be not exactly true, or true without exception, then there are corrections of them which are the truths at which I point. Then the proposition properly limited by expectation is such, as truth as I mean. Everybody upon every occasion in which man's moral nature comes into question, and what occasion is unconnected with man's moral nature? Every man, I say, upon every occasion, is ready to utter and to assent to propositions such as these, if not exactly these, still such as these. And I say that this perpetual enunciation and acceptance of such propositions implies and makes it indisputably certain that they have in them a substantial truth. Whewell's lecture on systemic morality. The view which I take of this subject is briefly as follows. It is manifest to everyone that we all stand in various and dissimilar relations to all the sentient beings created and uncreated with which we are acquainted. Among our relations to created beings are those of man to man, and that of substantial equality of parent and child, of benefactor and recipient, of husband and wife, of brother and brother, citizen and citizen, citizen and magistrate, and 1,000 others. Now it seems to me that as soon as human being comprehends the relation in which two human beings stand to each other, there arises in his mind a consciousness of moral obligation, connected by our Creator, with the very conception of this relation. And the fact is the same whether he be one of the parties or not. The nature of this feeling is that the one ought to exercise certain dispositions towards the others, to whom he is thus related, and to act towards them in a manner corresponding with those dispositions. Wayland's Elements of Moral Science. 2. Logic will teach us to observe the foundation of the distinctions between moral good and evil. All the systems we have examined, may I conceive, be referred to 6 distinct heads. First, the eternal and immutable nature of all moral distinctions. Second, that utility, public or private, is the foundation of moral obligation. Third, that all morality is founded upon the will of God. Fourth, that a moral sense, feeling, or emotion is the ground of virtue. Fifth, that it is by supposing ourselves in the situation of others, or by a species of sympathetic mechanism, that we derive our notions of good and evil. And sixth, the doctrine of vibrations and the association of ideas. Those whose doctrine is mainly founded upon the first principle, that of the eternal and immutable nature of all moral distinctions, are Dr. Cudworth and Mr. John Locke. Bishop Cumberland, who adopts, however, this principle with more qualifications than several others, Mr. Wollaston, by his fitness of things, and Dr. Clarke, by his truth of things, Dr. Price, Mr. Gisborne, and Dr. Dewar. Those writers who ground their theories upon the doctrine of utility, or as it is sometimes termed, the selfish system, are rather numerous. Mr. Hobbes is the first on the list. Mr. Stewart remarks that there is in point of principle a far more close and intimate connection between the opinions of this writer and Mr. Hume and others of this school than what has commonly been imagined. And this remark is perfectly correct. Mr. Hume himself is at the head of this philosophical party. Mandeville's Fable of the Bees is, though in a caricaturist dress, bottomed on the same views of human nature. Pope and Bolingbroke take the universal weal as the standard of morals. Mr. Rutherford considers the advantages which the scriptures hold out to those who practice virtue, and the ultimate end of it. Paley's system is well known as grounded on the general good. Goodwin's political justice and Mr. Bentham's systems are founded upon the same principle. Archbishop King stands alone in maintaining that the will of God is the sole foundation of virtue, if we accept Dr. Paley, who has coupled this principle with the system of expendency. Those who are advocates for a moral sense are Shaftesbury, Bishop Butler, Dr. Hutchinson, Lord Kames, Professor Stewart, and Dr. Thomas Brown. Dr. Coogan's views seem grounded on the same views. Dr. Adam Smith's work on moral sentiments is the only one which is grounded solely on the principle of sympathy. Dr. Priestley and Dr. Hartley are the only 2 writers who maintain that the association of ideas is the ground of good and evil. There are none of these different systems that are not, in some degree, founded on truth. But the greatest imperfection which runs through them all is that they attempt to generalize too much. We cannot resolve all the moral feelings and habits of our nature into one general principle. Blakely's History of Moral Science. 3. Logic will teach us a proper mode of classification with regard to those actions or motives that are morally good or evil. The division of virtue to which we are nowadays most accustomed is into duties towards God as piety, reverence, resignation, gratitude, etc., towards other men, or relative duties as justice, clarity, loyalty, etc., towards ourselves as chastity, sobriety, temperance, preservation of life, care of health, etc. Paley's Moral Philosophy. The following is an enumeration of some of the duties of the public company. The duties of public companies. The first of these duties is to obey the laws. A public company should abstain from smuggling and all other illicit proceedings. should make correct returns to the government and pay its fair proportion of the property tax and all other duties. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's. Render to all the duties, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour. Another duty is to enforce the laws upon others. Individuals sometimes abstain from prosecuting frauds upon themselves from a misapplied feeling of compassion, an unwillingness to incur odium, or the fear of expense. But none of these feelings are sufficient to justify a public company in abstaining from this duty. Such a course is injurious to the public by holding out inducements to the commission of similar crimes. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. It is also the duty of public companies to support the cause of order and of due submission to constituted authorities, the rights of property, the supremacy of law, the impartial administration of public justice, and to honour the constitutional form of government of the country, by whatever party it may be administered. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, be gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. Another duty is to conduct the affairs of the company on such a liberal yet prudent scale of expense, as such afford encouragement to the industry, trade, and fine arts of the country. Solomon says, "Prepare thy work without, and make it fit for thyself, in the field, and afterwards build thy house." Which means, if we understand it rightly, get your money before you spend it, but having got it, live on a scale of expense corresponding to your means. Afterwards, build thy house. Individuals may be justified in living much within their means in order to provide for old age or for the proper settlement of their children, but public companies cannot have such motives for conducting their establishments with an unsuitable economy. But above all, it is the duty of a public company to maintain, in all its transactions, a high-toned morality. Righteousness exalteth a nation. A departure from moral rectitude is altogether inexcusable in a public company, as all their actions are presumed to be the result of previous deliberations. They cannot plead in excuse, as individuals do, the power of passion, the impulse of the moment, or the force of habit. In proportion to the weakness or the absence of temptation, in such proportion would their conduct be the more criminal, while their wealth and influence would render their example more extensively injurious to the public morality. If parties of high station in society depart from the more strict rule of duty, those of inferior station will derive still more wildly. If a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. Gilbart's Practical Treatise on Banking. 4. Logic will teach us to notice the different species of any particular virtue or vice. Question. What is forbidden in the 8th commandment? Answer. The 8th commandment forbiddeth whatsoever doth or may unjustly hinder our own or our neighbour's wealth or outward estate. Question. How may we be said to steal from ourselves? Answer. By idleness, niggardliness, and prodigality. Question. How many ways may persons be said to steal from others or unjustly hinder their neighbour's wealth or outward estate? Answer. Several ways, particularly by theft, robbery, resetting, defrauding, monopolizing, and taking unlawful usury. Assembly's Shorter Catechism, explained by James Fisher. A merchant should be an honourable man, although a man cannot be an honourable man without being an honest man. Yet a man may be strictly honest without being honourable. Honesty refers to pecuniary affairs. Honour refers to the principles and feelings. You may pay your debts punctually, you may defraud no man, and yet you may act dishonourably. You act dishonourably when you give your correspondents a worse opinion of your rivals in trade than you know they deserve. You act dishonourably when you sell your commodities at less than their real value in order to get away your neighbour's customers. You act dishonourably when you purchase at higher than the market price in order that you may raise the market upon another buyer. You act dishonourably when you draw accommodation bills and pass them to your banker for discount, as if they rose out of real transactions. You act dishonourably in every case wherein your external conduct is at variance with your real opinions. You act dishonourably if, when carrying out prosperous trade, you do not allow your servants or assistants, through whose exertions you obtain your success, to participate in your prosperity. You act dishonourably if, after you have become rich, you are unmindful of the favours you received when you were poor. In all these cases there may be no intentional fraud. It may not be dishonest, but it is dishonourable conduct. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 5. Logic will teach us to investigate the causes and consequences of virtues and vice, and the various circumstances by which they may be attended. The effect of intemperance in shortening life is strikingly exemplified in the contrast afforded by other classes of society to the Quakers, a set of people of whom I must again speak favourably. It appears from accurate calculation that in London only 1 person in 40 attains the age of 80, while among the Quakers, whose sobriety is proverbial and who have long set themselves against the use of ardent spirits, not less than 1 in 10 reaches that age. A most striking difference, and one which carries its own inference along with it. It is remarked by an eminent practitioner that of more than 100 men in a glass manufactory, 3 drank nothing but water, and these 3 appeared to be of the proper age, while the rest who indulged in strong drinks seemed 10 or 12 years older than they proved to be. This is conclusive. Macnish's Anatomy of Drunkardness. But if a man is a fool to expect to attain wealth by dishonest means, he is a still greater fool if he expects that wealth so acquired will afford him any enjoyment. Enjoyment, did I say? It is possible that in such a case any man can expect enjoyment. What? Enjoyment for you? You who have obtained wealth by falsehood, by deception, by extortion, by oppression? You expect enjoyment? Listen to the hearty denunciations of all honest men, to the awful imprecations of those you have injured, to the reproaches of your family, whose name you have dishonoured, to the accusations of that conscience whose voice you have stifled, and to the wrathful thunder of that heaven whose laws you have outraged. Listen to these are the enjoyment that will attend your ill-gotten wealth. He that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. Lectures on Ancient Commerce. 6. Logic will teach us how to apply general principles to particular acts, institutions, or opinions, and to judge of them properly. War. When we contemplate the example of our Lord Jesus Christ, forming a perfect contrast to the war character, and remember that it was designed as a pattern for our conduct, when we consider his precepts, and reflect that these are of perpetual obligation, and further bring to mind that his followers took no part in wars for more than 200 years after his personal appearance on earth, we can entertain a doubt of the incompatibility of war with the duties of a Christian. Can we draw any other conclusion than that in adopting the spirit and practice of war, we must act with such inconsistency with the precepts and example of Jesus Christ, and the example of his followers as amounts to a dereliction of Christianity itself. Oaths. The imposition of an oath carries with it the strong presumption that the individual is not to be believed without it. This idea has an extensively demoralizing effect on those who are placed within the sphere of its influence. It opens a wide door to the disgusting vice of lying, when men become reconciled to the idea that an oath is necessary to the truth. It is a kindred feeling to reconcile them to falsehood in their ordinary communications. Nor is this the only immoral tendency of requiring oaths to ensure the truth. It holds out a temptation to swearing in conversation, reconciled in the first place to speak falsehood, unless under the coercion of an oath, and in the next place to attest the truth by swearing. A disposition is produced in some men to give their conversation the appearance of truth by interspersing it with profane oaths. Salutations. They believe there is no propriety in bowing the body and uncovering the head to any created beings, for worship belongs to God only. But if we are told that in fashionable life these actions have no such intention, we reply that if they have become unmeaning, men of correct feelings ought neither to offer nor receive them. If they are intended only to express civility and ordinary respect, we say that these can be expressed in a more appropriate manner than by degrading the outward acts of divine worship down to a mere expression of common civility, or even nothing at all. Everything which relates to divine worship, or that homage we pay to the Almighty, should be carefully guarded from being introduced into the familiar intercourse between man and man, lest by the association of ideas our worship itself become adulterated and offensive. We believe that, under the gospel, we are bound to speak every man truth to his neighbour. The expressions Mr. or Master, and your most obedient, etc., your humble servant, etc., being in common application untrue, we decline to use. The love and charity which the gospel inspires are above all complimental expressions, and need neither flattery nor falsehood to set them off to advantage. The plain language, as we term it, or the use of the singular pronouns to a single person, has much to recommend it. In the first place, it is consonant to truth, for the plural pronoun does express a plurality of persons to whom it relates. Hence we consider it a departure from truth to address a single individual with a word that conveys an idea of more than one. We consider the plain language too as the language of the greatest and best of men that have ever lived, to one another and to God. And we think this authority ought to possess great weight. The rules of the language contribute something to the same effect. It must be admitted that the beauty and precision of the language are greatly injured by the promiscuous use of the plural pronoun. Amusements. Those vain amusements which have been denominated recreations, we consider beneath the dignity of the Christian character, and they frequently prove the inlet to much vice and corruption. H. Turk, in his Principles of Religion, chapter 9, says, "There are 3 rules relating to amusements by which our conduct should be regulated. 1. To avoid all those which tend needlessly to oppress and injure any part of the animal creation. Of this class are cockfighting and horse racing, also hunting, etc., when engaged in for diversion and pleasure. 2. To abstain from such as we are connected with a spirit of hazardous enterprise, by which the property and temporal happiness of individuals and families are often made to depend on the most precarious circumstances, and the gain of one frequency entails misery on many. Of these classes are all games in which property is staked. 3. To avoid such as expose us to unnecessary temptations with respect to our virtue. or which dissipate the mind so as to render a return to civil and religious duties ungrateful. Of this kind, stage entertainments are particularly to be avoided, with various other places of public amusement, which have a tendency to corrupt the heart or to alienate it from the love and fear of God. The Doctrines of Friends by Elisha Bates. I shall conclude this section by a quotation on the moral effects of the industrial exhibition. The many friends that will be established during the existence of the exhibition between the members of different nations will be so many powerful motives for resisting war, so many guarantees for quiet and reasonable legislation, the breaking down of unfounded prejudices, a more accurate and enlarged knowledge of the real character of our neighbours, the right appreciation of their talents and other excellences, the perception of those points in which we ourselves are inferior to them. All these things have the same tendency, and they may rationally be expected to follow from the more close collision with foreigners, which will be caused by the great exhibition of industry. It is not enough, therefore, to say that it will, under this aspect, promote the welfare of mankind. We may boldly say it will promote their morality and religious welfare. Mr. Wish's Prize Essay. End of section 52. Read by Adam Roxby in Colchester, England.
Section 53 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The application of the art of reasoning to the formation of habits of reasoning. Part 1. The object of all rules is the formation of habits. Habits can be formed only by repeated acts. The rules direct how the act should be performed. The repetition of the act produces the habit, and when the habit is fixed, there is no further occasion for rules. But practice is still necessary in order to confirm and strengthen the habit. 1. To form a habit of reasoning, take care of your health. The possession of health seems essential to independence of mind. 'Tis those who have a weaker constitution who are led astray by the persuasion of others. The means that promote health, as temperance, early rising, and exercise in the open air, tend also to produce clearness and cheerfulness of mind. Do not let the love of reading lead you to sit up late or deprive you of proper rest and exercise. Literary knowledge, valuable as it is but a poor compensation for the loss of health. If you are one of the million, one who has employment to attend to during the day, do not in the evening engage in those studies that require strong or continuous mental exertion, such as Greek, Latin, mathematics, chemistry, etc., but rather direct your attention to those sciences which combine amusement with instruction, and the knowledge of which can be obtained with a moderate degree of application. If you are of such a temperament that the state of your health is likely to affect your judgment, I advise you to read frequently those quotations I have made from Dr. Watts in the 4th section of the first part of this work. Huffland has published a work upon the art of prolonging life, full of interesting observations. Philosophers, says he, enjoy a delightful leisure. Their thoughts, generally estranged from vulgar interests, have nothing in common with those afflicting ideas with which other men are continually agitated and corroded. Their reflections are agreeable by their variety, their liberty, and sometimes even by their frivolity. Devoted to the pursuits of their choice, the occupations of their taste, they dispose freely of their time. Oftentimes they surround themselves with young people, that their natural vivacity may be communicated to them, and in some sort produce a renewal of their youth. We may make a distinction between the different kinds of philosophy in relation to their influence upon the duration of life. those which direct the mind towards sublime contemplations, even were they in some degree superstitious, such as those of Pythagoras and Plato, are the most salutary. Next to them I place those, the study of which, embracing nature, gives enlarged and elevated ideas upon infinity, the stars, the wonders of the universe, the heroic virtues, and the pure and elevated doctrines of divine revelation. But those systems, says the writer just quoted, which turn only upon painful subtleties, which are dogmatic and positive, which bend all facts and opinions to form, and adjust them to certain preconceived principles, in fine, such as are thorny, barren, narrow, and contentious, these are fatal in tendency, and cannot but abridge the lives of those who cultivate them. Of this class was the philosophy of the Peripatetics, and that also of the Scholastics. Tumultuous passions and corroding cares are two sources of evil influences which a true philosophy avoids. Another influence adverse to life is that mental feebleness which renders persons perpetually solicitous about their health, effeminate and unhappy. Fixing their thoughts intensely on the functions of life, those functions that are subjects of this anxious inspection become wearied. Imagining themselves diseased, they soon become so. The undoubting confidence that we shall enjoy health is perhaps one of the best means of preserving it. Art of being happy. 2. To form a habit of reasoning, attend to the health of your mind. Do not exercise any one faculty unduly. Do not indulge the imagination. Read no novels and but little poetry. Do not overload the memory. Think as well as read, but do not think intensely on any one subject. The reasoning powers then become distracted and enfeebled. A quickness of mental perception, a lively and vigorous imagination, and a ready and retentive memory are highly useful and ornamental qualities, but they are individually limited in their beneficial influence. The reasoning power, however, is of vital use. It is the cornerstone of the intellectual building, giving grace and strength to the whole structure. Without it, all the other faculties of the soul would be of little or no utility. All the differences in the mental qualifications of men may be traced to the various degrees of original strength in this quality of the mind, or to the successful manner in which it has been cultivated and improved. Blakey's Essay on Logic. In order to improve yourself in logic, I would advise you to avoid, especially in your youth, discussions on those abstract principles of morals and metaphysics, which in every age of the world have puzzled, and which continue to puzzle, the most profound philosophers. Limit your inquiries and investigations to those things respecting which you may hope to arrive at some satisfactory conclusion, and which are also capable of some useful practical application. The absorption of the mind in mysticism tends to impair both the faculty of perception and the power of reasoning. I would also advise you to avoid reading books written in an obscure or affected style. Such writings tend to injure the perceptive faculty, and to familiarize the mind with obscure ideas or with ideas obscurely expressed. Read those works which are remarkable for profound reasoning and clear expression. Read with a pencil in your hand and mark those paragraphs that contain any examples of clear and beautiful reasoning. If the newspapers you read are your own, cut out with a penknife all the good pieces of argumentation you may find, and after a while read them over again and classify them according to the principles or forms of reasoning they can be employed to illustrate. 3. To form a habit of reasoning, associate your reasonings with your daily avocations. Don't imagine that the great end of the art of reasoning is to enable you to refute or to instruct other people. Its chief end is to enable you to teach yourself. Logic, says Dr. Watts, is the art of using our reason well in the search after truth and in the communication of it to others. But don't fancy that to search after truth means nothing more than reading books or what is called study. You will find that your daily duties, your own reflections, and the conduct of mankind around you will supply you with truths quite as interesting and as important as any that you will meet with in books. Think on these. Before performing any action, ask yourself, what are the reasons for doing it? And then ask, what are the reasons for not doing it? Then consider the principles of your arguments and the various forms in which they may be expressed. When you have acquired the habit of thus reasoning on your own actions, you will soon learn to apply the same mode of reasoning to the actions of other people. We never hear anyone praised for being a good logician. The fact is that when a man reasons well, he is famed not for his knowledge of logic, but for his knowledge of the art to which his logic is applied. When a lawyer reasons well, he is celebrated not as a good logician, but as a good lawyer. The late Sir William Follett owed much of his reputation to the beautiful clearness of his reasoning. It is the same in every other profession. If a tradesman reasons well when talking with his customers, he is never suspected of being skilled in logic. But what is of more importance, he gets the character of being a good tradesman. And if a man reasons well upon matters in general, he is reckoned a sensible man. Never boast of your logic. A reputation as a logician will damage the effect of your reasonings. Your opponent may fancy that his inability to answer your arguments arises not from the weakness of his cause, but from your superior skill as a disputant. 4. To form a habit of reasoning, rather divide your reading and studies among a variety of subjects than confine yourself to one subject. Try to be distinguished in your profession, but do not be distinguished in anything else. If so, those engaged in the same profession will endeavor to detract from your professional reputation by praising you for other attainments. You had better divide your unprofessional reading and studies among a good many subjects, rather than confine them to one. This will afford you more pleasure, impose less mental labor, and give you a more lively exercise to your powers of reasoning. You will get the character of being a well-informed man, and awaken no envy by any special kind of superiority. Lord Bacon was a great lawyer, but he was also a great philosopher, and because he was a philosopher, he was supposed to be no lawyer. This opinion was entertained even by his distinguished contemporaries, the Minister Cecil and the Attorney General Coke. Disraeli observes that both were mere practical men of business, whose narrow conceptions and whose stubborn habits assume that whenever a man acquires much knowledge foreign to his profession, he will have less of professional knowledge than he ought. Beyond your profession, then, it is better you should know a little about a good many things than know a great deal about some one thing. This will give a more expansive character to your mind and greater variety to the exercise of your reasoning powers. Get, therefore, a general acquaintance with every branch of knowledge. You will find that the sciences to which I have more especially directed your attention, history, political economy, statistics, and moral philosophy, will supply you with an inexhaustible fund of topics about which you will have occasion to reason. They can be studied without any expensive apparatus, without any knowledge of Latin or Greek, and they refer to matters of the highest importance as well as to the affairs of everyday life. The lessons they teach will enable you both to judge of the conduct of nations and to regulate your own. These sciences are strictly logical sciences. The physical and mathematical sciences will not, so far as you are concerned, call for the same exercise of your reasoning powers. The knowledge of the physical sciences is acquired by observation and experience, and imparted by writing or conversation. Here there is little ground for reasoning. All that is known is certain and cannot be disputed. What is unknown does not afford sufficient evidence for the formation of opinions. In botany, natural history, geography, geology, and the other physical sciences, all we have to do is to listen and learn. Mathematics is all severe reasoning, but the practical application is mere routine. We learn ciphering at school mechanically. We add, subtract, multiply, and divide. We learn fractions and decimals and know how to extract the square and cube roots all by rule. Nor can it be denied that all these operations may be performed very well without any knowledge of the scientific principles on which they are founded. The higher branches of mathematics and their application to geometry, astronomy, navigation, etc., require great exertions of the reasoning powers, and eminence is rarely attained in this kind of knowledge, but by the devotion of the whole time to its pursuit. Happily, however, this high degree of knowledge is not necessary to every member of the community. If you are acquainted with arithmetic, understand simple equations in algebra, and know how to use a table of logarithms, you have as much knowledge of mathematics as you are likely to require in the ordinary business of life, and this will not tax very heavily on your powers of reasoning. It has often been asserted that a familiarity with mathematical reasoning unfits the mind for proficiency in moral reasoning. I have never seen any evidence that has convinced me of the soundness of this opinion. No doubt a man will enter more readily upon that kind of reasoning with which he is most familiar. A professor of mathematics may reason well on mathematics and badly on morals, simply because he is accustomed to one kind of reasoning and not accustomed to the other. This affords no evidence that his capacity for moral reasoning has been impaired by his study of mathematics. It appears to me more rational to suppose that the discipline imparted to the mind by mathematical studies tends to give increased precision and energy to all the other operations in which it may engage. At the same time, in passing through life, you will find that a dexterity in performing the operations of arithmetic will be of more use to you than a knowledge of the abstract principles on which these operations are founded. Sam Slick says, "If you wish to go ahead, there's nothing like ciphering." 5. To form a habit of reasoning, you must keep yourself in practice. One way of doing this is frequently to review all your opinions and examine the arguments by which they are supported and the objections to which they are exposed. Do not take your opinions in clusters upon the authority of the party or body to which you belong. Examine them one by one for yourself, and be at all times prepared to render a reason for any doctrine that forms an article in either your political or your religious creed. Read occasionally those books or newspapers that contain attacks upon the sentiments you hold, and think to yourself what you would say in case you were called upon to reply to those attacks. Take a parliamentary speech, for instance, and fancy how you would reply to it. In cases of actual contest, attack the most able man of his party. You pay yourself a poor compliment by selecting a weak opponent. It is by wrestling with superior minds that we increase our own strength. In logical disputation, as in social life, no honor can be gained by quarrels with inferiors. You should engage only in those contests in which victory is attended with renown. Many of our most distinguished men have in their youth been members of debating societies. We have in former days met at such societies men of high talent who have rendered and are still rendering good service to their country and to the world. These associations possess the same advantages and are liable to the same objections that are pointed out by Dr. Watts in regard to scholastic disputations. I believe that societies formed for the sole purpose of debate are not so numerous as formerly, but most of our literary and scientific institutions have a discussion class which answers the same purpose. I advise you to join this class. Institutions that are adapted to make wise men wiser should not be laid aside merely because in some instances they may do injury to men who are not wise. If you have a talent for speaking, by all means cultivate it, but do not fancy that a fluent speaker is necessarily a good logician. Study your speeches beforehand and arrange your thoughts under 1, 2, or 3 heads, but do not write them out. Guard against dogmatism on the one hand and skepticism on the other. Discuss only those questions on which there can be a reasonable difference of opinion. Never attempt to prove a doctrine that is transparently true, nor to refute a doctrine that is transparently absurd, and never, even to get up a debate, argue in favor of any doctrine that you do not honestly believe. At the close of every debate, sum up in your own mind the arguments that have been advanced on both sides of the question that has been discussed, and then form, correct, or confirm your own opinion. On this subject, I will quote from Mr. John Mottram's Institutional Education. This essay obtained the prize offered to its members by the City of London Literary and Scientific Institution for the best essay on the characteristics and advantages of literary and scientific institutions, their claims to the support of society, and the best means of extending their usefulness. It is a good thing for a man that he should bring his opinion into occasional conflict with those of other men, that he should regard those opinions from other points of view than what his own mind can furnish of itself, that he should look upon them as others look upon them, and either be strengthened in his own impressions, or suffer those impressions to pass away, in either case becoming mentally and morally advantaged. And this has its practical advantages in our daily life. It is necessary for a man that he should be prepared to take part in the conflict of opinion that is constantly going on in the world. And these occasional argumentative contests prepare him for this work. The power of accustoming ourselves to discuss the opinions of others becomes a habit of the greatest advantage to society. It prevents the taking upon trust new opinions, or the pinning our faith to any, however prevalent they may be, and it promotes that spirit of inquiry into the rationality of an opinion that must tend very considerably to augment the predominance of truth among men, and to aid on their progress. The man who feels the power within himself which frequent discussion upon all matters moral and political will give him, who appreciates the much higher character of this power over other modes of influencing men's minds, will not be the man to apply to the legislature of his country for acts to coerce the opinions of his fellow man, or to legalize and support his own views, by this course seeking to bring discredit and ruin upon the opinions of others. Nor will he be the man to raise the standard of rebellion, making violence the arbitrator between truth and error, but ever struggling on, eager in the promulgation of his convictions, ever preparing and ever using the weapons mind places at his disposal. He will in this way, and in no other, seek to make his opinions prevail around him. These institutions, in affording scope for the necessary inquiries, and for the preparation necessary to the culture of this reliance upon the power of argument and the continual progress of truth, put forward great claims to the support and attention of society. They are the schools, and they might be made more effectual schools, for the preparation required for taking part in the active duties and struggles of the world. Within their walls there is much of the information, order, and propriety of arrangements acquired, which fit a man for taking part in public business, to the advantage of the society of which he is a member. Institutional education. End of section 53. Read by Belinda Mc, Melbourne, 1st of August 2024. Section 54 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The Application of the Art of Reasoning to the Formation of Habits of Reasoning, Part 2. To form a habit of reasoning, attend to the discipline of your own mind with regard to its moral principles and dispositions. The cultivation of the moral feelings improves the intellectual faculties. A sound heart is less likely to go astray than a clever head. The entrance of thy words giveth light, it giveth understanding to the simple. On this subject we shall be content to quote from two authors, not theologians, who have written on very different subjects. Mr. Taylor of the Colonial Office thus writes in his work entitled The Statesman: If there be in the character not only sense and soundness, but virtue of a high order, then however little appearance there may be of talent, a certain portion of wisdom may be relied upon almost implicitly. For the correspondencies of wisdom and goodness are manifold, and that they will accompany each other is to be inferred, not only because men's wisdom makes them good, but also because their goodness makes them wise. Questions of right and wrong are a perpetual exercise of the faculties of those who are solicitous as to the right and wrong of what they do and see, and a deep interest of the heart in these questions carries with it a deeper cultivation of the understanding than can be easily effected by any other excitement to intellectual activity. Although, therefore, simple goodness does not imply every sort of wisdom, it unerringly implies some essential conditions of wisdom. It implies a negative on folly, and an exercise judgment within such limits as nature shall have prescribed to the capacity. And where virtue and extent of capacity are combined, there is implied the highest wisdom, being that which includes the worldly wisdom with the spiritual. The Statesman. Mr. Blaikie, who is now the Professor of Logic and Metaphysics in the Queen's College, Belfast, writes as follows: I'm fully convinced that there is a much closer connection between mental superiority and a belief in the Scriptures than is commonly imagined. Skeptical modes of thinking have a direct and natural tendency to beget a captious, quibbling, sophistical habit, to create and foster literary arrogance and conceit, to destroy whatever is candid and ingenuous in controversial warfare, to make the mind diminutive, rickety, and distorted, and to induce men to set a higher value on crotchety sophisms than on the inspirations of real wisdom and science. On the other hand, where the Scriptures are embraced with that sincerity, heartiness, and singleness of mind to which their manifest importance so justly entitles them, we will perceive a comprehensiveness, a vigour, and elasticity given to our minds, which cannot fail to place us on the vantage ground, whatever branch of knowledge we may choose to cultivate or to excel in. The mind, no longer groping its way through the hazy and murky atmosphere of doubt and uncertainty, advances with a firm and confident step under the bright and irradiating influence of the Sun of Truth. By the contemplation of whatever is grand and sublime in doctrine and pure and simple in precept, our minds are naturally led by our established constitution to spread themselves into a wider compass, to improve their various powers or faculties by giving them an enlarged sphere of action, to dwell upon what is great, noble, and excellent, to pursue our course with freedom and boldness, unencumbered with babbling sophistries, and cheered with a consolatory reflection that we are engaged in promoting whatever is esteemed among mankind fair, honourable, and praiseworthy. Blaikie's History of Moral Science. And now, gentle reader, I have finished my book upon the art of reasoning, and as there is an intimate connection between reasoning and speaking, I shall add an appendix on the philosophy of language. This appendix is the substance of a lecture I delivered in November 1832 before the Waterford Literary and Scientific Institution. After you have read it, I advise you to read the index, as this will recall to your mind the principal topics discussed in the body of the work. You may then place the book in the hands of your children or of younger brothers and sisters. But before you do this, you had better read it a second time and mark with a pencil those parts best adapted for their first reading. You will perhaps think that they may commit to memory the leading paragraphs in the second and third parts in the same way that they have learned at school the first principles of grammar and geography, and that the other parts of the work may be divided into lessons in reading. Young men may form themselves into classes and read a section at each of their meetings, and every member might, from his own reading, occupation, or profession, give an additional illustration of the rules propounded in the section. In this way, they might train their minds into an accurate mode of thinking and of reasoning without encumbering themselves with the technicalities and subtleties of scholastic logic. They who desire nothing more than useful amusement may skip the rules and read the illustrations. These, in the language of a reviewer, form a collection of elegant extracts. Appendix: The Philosophy of Language. Philosophers have given various definitions of man. These definitions have been founded on the circumstances by which he is chiefly distinguished from other animals. By some he is styled a rational animal, being endowed with reason. Though several of the inferior animals, such as dogs, horses, and elephants, discover great sagacity in particular circumstances, yet none seem to be endowed with that faculty which we style reason, the power of reflecting, of comparing ideas, of drawing inferences, and of tracing consequences. The instinct which they possess is sufficient for the station which Providence has assigned to them in this lower world. It rises at once to maturity, and is not, like the reason of men, developed by slow and imperceptible degrees. While instinct thus rises rapidly to maturity, it never surpasses a certain point. Reason seems capable of an indefinite degree of improvement. The arts and sciences are progressive through succeeding generations, where one ends, another begins. But instinct makes no improvement. A bird of the 19th century will build his nest in the same way as a bird that lived 2,000 years ago, and build it too without any previous instruction, and without having seen a single nest constructed. Man has been defined a religious animal. No other animal that we are aware of has any sense of religion. They have no consciousness that they are indebted for their existence to the power of a superior being, no sense of obligation to him, no anticipation of their own death. Of course, they have no assemblies for religious worship. They perform no act of devotion. Their conduct cannot be influenced by a fear of punishment or a hope of reward in a future state of existence. It is true, they have some dispositions which, among mankind, are deemed moral qualities. They are more temperate than men. They possess attachment for their offspring, and are free from that ambition and avarice which are the great sources of human vices. But these dispositions, being conferred by nature and not regulated by considerations of duty or propriety, ought more properly to be termed instincts than moral qualities. Man has been defined a political animal, as men only are found to associate in a political society. The inferior animals seem to have no notion of the advantages to be derived from a division of labor. Each animal provides its own food, makes its own nest, and performs everything for itself. Nor do we find among them any class who devote themselves to the service of the community, and who consequently are supported by the labor of others. They have no lawyers, no judges, no magistrates to adjust their disputes, no professors to impart knowledge, no physicians to heal the sick. There are a few cases in which animals live in society. Such are the bees, who live under a monarchy, even in North America, and even in France and Germany, where the Salic law is in force. Their monarch is always a female. Man has been defined a cooking animal because he alone cooks his food before he eats it. The bird eats the worm without either roasting or boiling it, and all animals eat their food, whether it be animal or vegetable, in the state in which it is produced. But nearly all the food of man first undergoes an artificial preparation. Fruits and salads are the chief things he eats raw. Nor does man, like the other animals, confine his beverage to the pure water of the spring, but has recourse to infusions and distillations in order to render his drink more palatable or more potent. Man has been defined a tool-making animal. Whatever other animals perform, whether they collect their food or construct their habitation, they use only those instruments with which nature has endowed them, but man looks about for tools and constructs machines. By these means he increases his power and effects his objects better and more rapidly than he could otherwise do. Man has been defined a pugnacious animal. That is, he alone, in contending against his enemies, employs artificial weapons. When the other animals fight, they use only the weapons which nature has given them. It is by their horns, their teeth, their claws, or their poison that they assail their foes. But man has put every part of nature under contribution to supply him with weapons of destruction. He has depopulated forests and drawn iron from the mine, and compelled chemistry to furnish materials by which he might more effectually destroy his fellow creatures. O shame to man! Devil with devil damned firm concord holds. Men only disagree of creatures rational. This definition, however, is said to be not strictly correct, as several tribes of monkeys are known to use sticks and branches of trees in contending against each other. If, however, this distinction is not peculiar to man, we have the consolation to reflect that it is not shared with us by any but monkeys. Man has been defined a laughing animal. Though all animals are susceptible of pleasure, yet none of them expresses it in that peculiar way which is styled laughing. But the definition of man which has the nearest relation to our present subject is that he is a talking animal. No other animal is endowed with the faculty of speech. A language is a collection of sounds employed by the people of any country to convey their ideas to each other. The word philosophy is derived from two Greek words which mean the love of learning, and in modern use is employed to denote the investigation of abstract principles. The various branches or departments of philosophy are usually called sciences. A science is different from an art. Science consists in the investigation of causes and principles with a view to the discovery of general rules. Art consists in the application of those rules to practical purposes. All art is founded on some science, and most sciences lead to the practice of some useful art. Though the words science and philosophy may, in point of meaning, be considered as nearly synonymous, both denoting the investigation of principles, yet from custom the word science is limited to those branches of human knowledge which have a reference to the properties of matter, such as astronomy, navigation, and the different branches of the mathematics, while the term philosophy is applied to those branches of knowledge which have a reference to the faculties of the mind and to the various relations of human life. Thus we speak of the philosophy of the human mind, of moral philosophy, the philosophy of history, the philosophy of taste, the philosophy of rhetoric, and the philosophy of language. Philosophy as applied to language bears the same relation to grammar as science does to art, or as the business of an architect does to that of a mason. The grammarian, like the mason, is governed by the established rules. He requires that sentences should be constructed according to the acknowledged laws of the language. The philosophy or the science of language investigates the propriety of these laws, considers the circumstances in which they originated, and endeavours to ascertain whether, in some cases, more elegance and convenience may not be obtained by a departure from them than by their rigid observance. In the prosecution of this subject, I shall in the present lecture consider the nature, the origin, and the formation of language. 1. The nature of language. Language is a collection of sounds expressive of ideas and employed as a means of intercourse among mankind. The inferior animals have certain sounds by which they express their feelings. Many fishes, indeed, cannot utter any kind of sounds, and many worms are in the same state. But most birds and beasts have the power of uttering sounds. If they feel pain, they express the sensation by a certain sound. If they feel pleasure, they express it by another sound. If exposed to danger too, they employ another sound. But this is not language, for men too express their sensations by certain sounds distinct from words, and even men who are born dumb will express the sensations of pain and pleasure, fear and desire by certain natural sounds wholly distinct from articulate language. But animals have a further power than this. Not only do they express sensations by peculiar sounds, but they also employ certain sounds as a means of intercourse with each other. A hen, by a certain sound, will inform her chickens that she has found some food for them to eat, and they will all run to devour it. By another sound, she can inform them of the near approach of a hawk, and they will all rush beneath her wings. So also most animals appear to be acquainted with the voices of their enemies. When the lion roars, the beasts of the forest will run to a place of shelter, and a hare will hasten away when she hears the voice of a pack of hounds. These sounds, however, which animals have the power of uttering, seem totally distinct from language, and are analogous to those sounds which men can utter who are unable to speak. An infant can express pain and pleasure by certain sounds, even in its tenderest age, and long before it has learned the use of language, it has acquired certain sounds of its own, which it employs as a means of intercourse with those around. These animal sounds differ from language in the first place in being natural and instinctive, whereas language is always acquired. If a dog were bred up apart from all other dogs, it would nevertheless acquire the practice of barking, and were there only one bird in the world, that bird would sing. These exercises would be as natural to them as it is natural for a child to cry. But if a child were brought up by itself, it would never learn to speak. We know very well that when children are born deaf, they always remain dumb. Nay, more, even speech, when once acquired, is liable to be lost. Some of us, I dare say, have forgotten in a great degree languages which we understood pretty well when we were at school. And Selkirk, whose solitary residence in a desert island for 4 years gave rise to the popular novel of Robinson Crusoe, had, when taken away, nearly lost the use of speech and pronounced his words very imperfectly. If we wish to retain the knowledge of any language, it is indispensably necessary that we write and talk it frequently. But animals retain the sounds by which they communicate with each other without any danger of losing them, or of becoming unable to utter them distinctly. The reason is that with them the sounds are natural, while with us language is always acquired. Another difference between these animal sounds and human language is that these sounds are expressive of sensations, but language is expressive of ideas. If I feel cold, I have a sensation of cold, but if I think of cold without feeling it, I have then an idea of cold. Animals feel external impressions like men, and they have sounds to denote those feelings. As sounds are expressive of sensations, it follows that they are all similar, for a similar sensation will produce a similar sound. All dogs of the same species will bark alike, all birds of the same species will sing alike, but 20 men will express the same idea in as many different ways. Thus, if a man has a very painful toothache, he may sigh, he may groan, he may weep. This is the expression of the sensation, and all men expressing the same sensations might express it in the same way and by similar sounds. But if he wished to communicate to some other person the idea that he had a very painful toothache, this idea might be conveyed in as many different ways as there are languages, and even 20 people who spoke the same language might use different words to convey this idea. Sensations are expressed by nearly similar sounds, but the same ideas may be expressed by various sounds. Another difference between animal sounds and human language is that the latter is capable of being subdivided into syllables. Animals are without articulation. A word is not a continuous sound. It is a succession of sounds gradually sliding into each other. Let anyone keep his organs of speech in a fixed position and try how many sounds he can utter by the mere emission of his breath, and he will find that these sounds are exceedingly few. In speaking, the organs of speech are perpetually varying their position, and thus they form articulate language. It is a remarkable fact that while we can construct mechanical instruments that shall emit sounds resembling the music of the birds, we can form none that are capable of uttering words. To this point, our discoveries in mechanical science have not yet been carried, and we have to look forward to future inventions when our harps and pianos shall accompany their music with their voices, and the organs in our churches shall not only sound the tunes, but also sing the psalms. End of section 54, read by Belinda Mc, Melbourne, 14th October 2024. Section 55 of Logic for the Million. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart. The Application of the Art of Reasoning to the Formation of Habits of Reasoning, Part 3. 2. I now proceed to consider the origin of language. It is very certain that infants do not speak as soon as they are born, and if born deaf, they do not learn to speak at all. Language, then, is not essential to existence. Man may exist without language. It has been a matter of much inquiry whether there was any period in the history of mankind wherein they were destitute of speech, and if so, in what way they became acquainted with the use of language. Some philosophers, both ancient and modern, have believed that mankind were originally savages, destitute of any knowledge of the arts and sciences, and even of the use of language, and then by their own unassisted exertions they reached their subsequent state of improvement, that language is entirely of human invention, and that previous to its discovery the communication of ideas among mankind was carried on by signs and gestures. Hence we may account for the variety of languages that exists in the world on the supposition that different branches of mankind fixed upon different sounds as the representatives of their ideas. But the opinion that all mankind were originally savages is unsupported by either reason or history. Had they been created savages, they would probably have remained savages forever. They could have formed no idea of a civilization which had never existed, nor have desired comforts, the want of which they did not feel. History does not record a single instance of a savage nation having become civilized by its own unassisted exertions. Civilization has never sprung up spontaneously from the soil. It has always been imported from abroad. The Greeks derived their civilization from the Egyptians, the Romans theirs from the Greeks. The nations conquered by Rome became civilized from their intercourse with the Romans. But if we attempt to trace the origin of civilization in Egypt and Babylon, we are at a loss, for neither history nor even tradition mentions any period at which these nations were not civilized. Founded soon after the flood, they possessed the knowledge of all the arts and sciences known to the antediluvian world. The fertility of their soils and the extent of their plains furnished ample provision for their population. Hence, as population increased, their civilization increased. While, on the other hand, those tribes or families who wandered in quest of new settlements became separated from the rest of mankind by mountains and forests and rivers, and their time being wholly occupied in seeking supplies of food, they lost in the course of a few generations the knowledge they originally possessed and fell into the savage state. It would thus appear from history and from reason that the savage state was not the original state of man, but a departure from that state arising from a want of communication through several ages with the other branches of the family of mankind. But although, in various places, man has been found in a savage state, he has never yet been found so far brutalized as to be destitute of speech. All tribes of savages, however widely separated from each other in various parts of the world, possess the knowledge of some articulate language. Among these savages, then, the invention of speech must have preceded their advance from the savage state. But is it not very unlikely that men who were in so rude a state as to be unable to invent the simplest implement of agriculture should invent a language? Even in our present state of civilization, were we suddenly bereft of our language and of all recollection of it, we should find some difficulty in framing a new language for ourselves. How then could a nation of savages be competent to effect such an object? Besides, in what way, previous to the invention of language, could a tribe of savages carry on the discussions upon the propriety of inventing it? Would it not be a curious sight were we to see 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 savages discussing without language the propriety of inventing speech and of fixing upon the various sounds that might be suitable to their respective ideas? Can we imagine for a moment that either House of Parliament could fully discuss, without language, the plainest matter connected with our national interests? And if not, how could a nation of savages discuss, without speaking, so abstruse a subject as that of language? If then language be not a human invention, it must have been communicated to man by some superior being. When man was first created, he must have been informed of the variety of sounds he was capable of uttering, and instructed in the way in which these sounds might be employed to denote sensations and ideas. The following account of the invention of the first language is given by Moses. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. Here it is presupposed that man was originally endowed with the faculty of speech, and was at the same time rendered capable of applying certain sounds to denote certain objects, and of remembering the association which he had thus formed. Agreeably with this sentiment is a representation of Milton in his Paradise Lost. To speak I tried, and forthwith spake. My tongue obeyed, and readily could name whate'er I saw. Thou sun, said I, fair light, and thou enlightened earth, so fresh and gay, ye hills and dales, ye rivers, woods and plains, and ye that live and move, fair creatures, tell if ye saw. How come I thus? How here? Not of myself, by some great Maker then, in goodness and in power preeminent. Tell me, how may I know him, how adore, from whom I have that thus I move and live, and feel that I am happier than I know? 3. We shall now consider the formation of language. We contend then that man was originally taught the nature of speech, and supernaturally endowed with the power of forming a language. And we shall now inquire what are those faculties of the mind which are brought into exercise by the attempt to employ this power, and what are the steps by which language would be gradually formed. These faculties we consider would be invention, association, and abstraction. As man at the first moment of his existence could have had no language, it is evident that the first words he uttered must have been words of pure invention. They could not have been borrowed from other languages or derived from other words, because no other words or language had any existence. To exercise this power of invention to an extent sufficient to form a language, it would be necessary that man should be capable of uttering a variety of sounds, that he should be able to assign distinct sounds to denote distinct ideas, and that he should be able to remember each sound which had thus been appropriated. He would, in the first place, form words to denote those objects which were visible to his senses, and by which he was immediately surrounded. These words must originally have been very few. His stock of words could not be greater than his stock of ideas. As his ideas increased, his words would increase. The three great classes of words in all languages are the names of things, the names of qualities, and the names of actions. Man would begin his efforts at language by giving names to things: the heavenly bodies, the natural scenery around him, the mountains, the hills, the rivers, the trees, and the fields, the birds, beasts, and other animals, and the several objects with which he came in more immediate contact would be designated by appropriate sounds. The qualities which are obvious to the senses would next be noticed, and the different colours, figures, tastes, and sounds would be named as soon as occasion presented them to his view. And then he would name those actions which he himself performed, or which he saw performed by the animals around him. Some philologists have considered that man did not invent any part of his language, but merely imitated the sounds issued by other animals, or by parts of the material universe. In support of this theory, they have adduced some words which resemble the sounds they are employed to denote, such as roar, crash, whisper. But these instances are too few to support a general theory. The greater part of the objects of our ideas are those which do not emit sounds, and to these the theory will not apply. Besides, this theory would import that man had heard all these various sounds before he had commenced to form words. The faculty of invention, however, would very soon be assisted by the faculty of association. It is not necessary to the present subject that I should enter into any metaphysical discussion of the principle of association. It is sufficient for us to know that when two ideas have a resemblance to each other, the occurrence of one to the mind often brings in the other. Hence, when the mind had, by the power of invention, appropriated a certain sound to denote a certain idea, if another idea occurred resembling the former, the association would lead to the formation of a sound that resembled the former sound. So, if we entertained an idea formed of two ideas, each of which had its respective name, we should, by the power of association, call the compounded idea by a word formed of the names of the two single ideas. Thus, if we had formed an idea of a horse and an idea of the sea, and had afterwards seen in the sea an animal resembling a horse, we should naturally call it a seahorse. Hence, in all languages have arisen compounded words, in some of which the parts have been so blended that the primitives of which they are composed cannot be ascertained but by the labour of philologists. There are numerous other ways in which the names of things would, by association, give rise to the names of other things. The names of trades and professions, for instance, are generally derived from the names of the commodities employed in carrying them on. Nouns, too, are often derived from verbs. These nouns denote the agent and the subject of the action. The agent in our language is denoted very often by adding r or er to the verb, as love, lover. Our language is deficient in not having words to denote the subject upon which the verb operates. Thus, we have no word to denote the person who is loved. We have only a few legal correlative terms of this sort, as payer, payee, drawer, drawee, mortgager, mortgagee. By association, too, words denoting things would give rise to words denoting qualities. Thus, if a house were made of wood, it would be very natural to call it a wooden house. And in this way, there are in all languages numerous classes of adjectives formed by changing the termination of the substantives. Although in our own language we often use the substantive as an adjective without changing its termination, as a gold chain, a silver watch, yet in many others we change the termination or make an addition to it, as a sandy soil, a mountainous country, a fruitful tree. Some writers have contended that in this way were formed all our adjectives denoting colours and other simple sensations. Thus, when we say a chestnut horse, the word chestnut is employed as the name of a colour, so also other words orange, violet, indigo. Names of qualities are not only derived from the names of things, but also from names of actions. Thus, we have a class of adjectives ending in able, which were formed by associating the idea of capability with the ideas of the verbs, such are eatable, marketable, teachable. Mankind would soon perceive that actions have qualities similar to those which are ascribed to things, and hence the names of the qualities of things would be employed with some little change to express the qualities of actions. Hence, from adjectives, which are the names of the qualities of things, would be formed adverbs, which are the names of the qualities of actions. The ideas being associated in the mind, the words would, by that association, be brought to resemble each other. In our language, adverbs of quality are often formed from adjectives by the addition of ly, as wise, wisely, beautiful, beautifully, cruel, cruelly. The faculty of association is not employed merely in the formation of new words, but it leads also to the application of old words to new ideas. Sometimes the material of which anything was formed was employed to denote the thing itself, as a stick, a horn, a stone. The name of one object was also applied to some other, to which it seemed to bear a resemblance. Thus, the word branch, which denotes a part of a tree, is applied to a part of almost every object that is capable of division. Hence we speak of the branch of a road, the branch of a river, the branch of a family, the branch of a discourse. Words which were originally employed to denote sensible objects were afterwards applied to intellectual ideas. The last object to which man directs his attention, and that which he finds the most difficult to comprehend, are the powers of his own mind. Hence, mankind have usually a large stock of words denoting sensible ideas before they think of naming those ideas which are intellectual. And the operations of the mind can scarcely be understood but by comparison with external objects. Mankind, therefore, having found or fancied some resemblance between sensible and intellectual ideas, applied the same words to both. In all languages, we find that words denoting intellectual ideas, when traced to their origin, are taken from sensible objects and were at first metaphors. The words understanding, evidence, reflection, as well as the words I have employed to denote the faculties of invention, association, and abstraction, are all taken from objects of sense. These words have now lost their metaphorical meaning and have become literal through being so frequently used. So we still speak of a man being burning with zeal, inflamed with anger, swollen with rage, and inflated with pride. And by the same figure of speech, we talk of a man having a hard heart or a soft heart, a thick head or a long head, a fertile imagination, a sound judgment, a strong memory, polished manners. And when we recommend circumspection to an individual, we tell him to look sharp. By the same principle of association, we apply to inanimate objects words denoting ideas peculiar to animals. Thus we speak of the head of a river, the face of a country, a neck of land, and an arm of the sea, of a running stream and a standing pool. We say the ground thirsts for rain, the earth smiles with plenty, and so we speak of a learned age, a happy period, and a melancholy disaster. It may be observed that in order to form an association between any two ideas in the mind, it is by no means necessary that there should be any resemblance between the ideas themselves. The mind is exceedingly capricious in its associations, and this caprice is abundantly evident in the formation of language. In former times, young women employed a good deal of their time in spinning. The idea of spinning became associated with the idea of a young woman, and to this day an unmarried lady is called a spinster. It was also usual to keep footboys, who were generally styled Jack, as a sailor is styled Jack in the present day. One part of the duty of a footboy was to pull off his master's boots, but in the progress of society an instrument was invented by which the master could take off his own boots, and this instrument was called a jack. Another part of the business of a footboy was to turn the spit, but here too manual labour was superseded by machinery. An instrument was invented by which a piece of meat could be roasted without the assistance of Jack, but his name was retained, and the new instrument was called a jack. Mr. Arkwright called some parts of his cotton machinery spinning jennies. The words Jack and Jenny, therefore, awaken very different ideas from those to which they were first applied. The power of association may from one word form a variety of others, and although all the derivations may bear some resemblance to the primitive word, yet they may have meanings widely different from each other. Thus the word get means to acquire, but it is used in a variety of senses. A man may get hungry, or he may get wet. He may get a wager, or he may get a cold. He may get money, or he may get drunk. By associating the word get with particles, the number of meanings is still farther increased. We may get in or get out. We may get off or get on. We may get up or get down. We may get through or get along. Each of these phrases has again a variety of meanings. When we say a man has got off, we may mean that he has alighted from his horse, or that he has escaped being hanged. But in all these various meanings, the primitive idea is retained, though the derivatives differ so widely. I might illustrate this observation by numerous other words of the same kind. Having considered the faculties of invention and association, I will now make a few observations upon the faculty of abstraction. To abstract means to draw from, to withdraw. I may see a white hat, a white horse, a white wall. Now, if I think of a white colour without thinking of the hat, or the horse, or the wall, I have then an abstract idea of white, which I may call whiteness. Now, this is called an abstract idea because it is drawn from some other idea with which it is naturally associated. It is impossible for the colour white to exist by itself. There must be some object that is white. But in the mind, we draw it from this object, and hence it is an abstract idea. In our language, the names of many of these ideas end in ness, as whiteness, blackness, sweetness, thickness. These are abstract sensible ideas derived from sensible ideas. But there are also abstract moral and intellectual ideas. Many of these are denoted by words ending in ity and ce, and are chiefly of Latin derivation, as frugality, hospitality, diligence, prudence. The faculty of abstraction not only gives rise to words denoting abstract qualities, but also to words denoting abstract actions. These are chiefly nouns and participles. There is a large class of nouns ending in ion, which are derived from Latin verbs, and which denote the abstract action of these verbs. Such are production, destruction, persuasion, vision, motion, etc. Some of these nouns are used not only in the sense of abstract actions, but also to denote the effect of the action. Thus, when we say, that country is remarkable for the production of corn, we use the word production in the sense of abstract action, and might supply its place by the present participle producing. But when we say corn is the chief production of that country, it is used as the name for the thing produced, and we could not supply its place by the present participle. These two different senses of the word are in some instances expressed by two different words. Thus, the abstract action of the word create is denoted by the word creation, and the thing created is called a creature. So the word edify means to build up. Edification denotes the abstract action of building, and the thing built is called an edifice. So, imagine, imagination, image. The words formed by abstraction become more numerous as society becomes more intellectual. Association belongs to poetry, abstraction to philosophy. A poetic imagination grasps at resemblances and hence brings together ideas that seemed at first to have no connection. It gives life and animation to everything beneath its touch. Its vivid conceptions cannot be expressed in ordinary language. New words are formed by combination, or words previously formed are applied in new and bold significations. But when mankind begin to study mental philosophy, when they begin to investigate causes, to trace consequences, and to discuss theories, then arise words of abstraction. It becomes necessary to form words that shall express ideas and relations remote from common observation. Precision of conception becomes necessary, and to assist precision of conception, it is necessary to have precision of language. An idea that is to be the subject of investigation must be detached from all other ideas with which it may be found in combination and viewed entirely alone. Hence arises the necessity of words of abstraction. Thus it is to invention, association, and abstraction that we are indebted for the formation of language. While there is nothing more important, there is nothing more mysterious than language. How is it that a single act of volition I can form sounds denoting the ideas that may exist in my mind? That these sounds are carried by the atmosphere to the ears of my auditors and awaken in their minds the same ideas which exist in my own? To explain in what mysterious manner this is effected is beyond the power of our philosophy. It is one of the secrets of nature known only to him who formed the ear and created the mind of man. One great advantage which man has over the other animals consists in the power of cooperation. It is by this means that the whole community is benefited by the exertions of each individual. This power of cooperation could not exist unless mankind possessed a prompt and perfect mode of communicating their ideas to each other. And this ready communication exists only by means of language. Language, too, is not merely a channel of thought, it is a vehicle of feelings, and by it we are able to impart our sentiments in such a way as to impress our emotions on the minds of our auditors. By language, men are aroused into indignation or softened into sympathy. Without language, we could not be enlightened with the instructions of science or enraptured with the beauties of poetry. To this we owe all the pleasures of our public assemblies and all the luxuries of social intercourse. It is from this we derive all the happiness we receive from the speculations of philosophy, the brilliancy of wit, the thunders of eloquence, and the melody of song. By the power of language, we are enabled to be useful to others. We can instruct the ignorant, caution the unwary, or console the afflicted. Of what use is the intense application of the student, the conceptions of the poet, or the contemplations of the philosopher, if the result of their labours is known only to themselves? Thoughts valuable as gold in the mine are of no use to others until coined into words. And by imparting information to others, our own faculties are improved. Our intellectual weapons are kept polished by use. Knowledge shut up in the mind of its possessor is like a stagnant pool, useful to none, and when allowed to flow out freely in the channels of language, it becomes a living fountain, the streams of which carry health and beauty and fertility into every district through which they roll. End of section 55. Read by Belinda Mc, Melbourne, 28th November 2024. End of Logic for the Million by James William Gilbart.